Chapter 408. This was a touching battle between the hero and the Demon King. At the end of the battle, the great Demon King cried. She told all her grievances, sadness, and unhappiness to the brave man who had conquered her. Then, there was the inexplicable battle between the hero and the Demon King, until she was exhausted. The sun shone into the room. The ice around the room was like a prism, reflecting the light of dawn. As if waking up from a hangover, Aurelia pushed away the thing that was pressing down on her and making it hard for her to breathe. She looked into the distance. The room was sealed in ice. Surprisingly, there was not much cold air leaking out of the ice, indicating that the owner still had good control over the ice. Not only that, Aurelia also sensed that there were several air vents at the top of the room to prevent the person inside from suffocating to death. Looking outside through the thin ice wall, all the scenery was hazy and beautiful. Aurelia felt like she was dreaming. She forgot all her sorrow and unhappiness and was immersed in the beautiful dream of a human named Xueqi. Ha! Xueqi? Aurelia dug her fingers into her long blonde hair. Only now did she suddenly realize what had happened last night. She finally found the thing that she had pushed away and thrown to the side of the bed. Damn! Xueqi, what happened to you? Aurelia screamed. Xueqi's whole body was stiff, like a corpse that had been dead for a long time. Only his shifty eyes, which were rolling around bitterly, could see that he was still alive. Aurelia suddenly found that there were a few lines of words written with arcane energy in the air. It was written in the common language. Last night, I went overboard. In order to gain power, I used the magic circuit to strengthen my body. Now my whole body hurts. Pfft. Aurelia burst out laughing. She even forgot to cover her beautiful body and let the Hyjal peaks tremble. Xueqi was so excited that his eyes were wide open. Unfortunately, he could only stare. Aurelia quickly wrapped herself in the blanket and carried Xueqi to the bed. Then, she lay on her side and slept next to Xueqi. She gently drew circles on Xueqi's chest with her index finger. Of course, it was not a curse, but something to do. I'm sorry, Xueqi. I've completely lost my rationality these days. I used my personal relationship to force you to do all kinds of irrational things. During this period, I only remember that you are the only person who can help quell the loss. But I forgot that you are also the deputy commander of the Alliance and the Grand Duke of Stormwind City. You also shoulder the future of humanity and the future of the Stormwind Kingdom. Xueqi typed with arcane energy. It's okay. Helping the Elven allies is still the general direction of the Alliance, so my subordinates, my friends, and the other kings still support me. Aurelia lowered her head. This is different. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. If I go too far, I go too far. I will deeply reflect on myself. However, I have become very, very hateful of the Horde. I think I will eagerly participate in the war between the Alliance and the Horde until I kill all the Horde and kick those hateful green-skinned people back to their planet. On this point, we are in agreement. Only a Horde whose bones are burned clean after death is a good Horde. Xueqi continued typing. Then, the air rippled with silence. That's right, we. Duke typed an ellipsis in the air, as if he hadn't had enough. Aurelia let out a pleasant laugh like a proud phoenix. Tisk, little guy. You only overthrew the Great Demon King once, and you want to claim that you conquered the Great Demon King? You want to marry me? You want the Great Demon King to be your woman? Kid, you are still too young. I'm a windrunner? I'm the symbol of the wind. Have you ever seen the wind stay in a certain harbor? You want to have me in the future? Sure. Wait until I'm in a good mood. Otherwise... Humph. Aurelia let out a triumphant laugh. Xueqi realized that he was still taking things for granted. What happened to the saying that if you marry a chicken, follow the chicken, and if you marry a dog, follow the dog? But on second thought, this was Aurelia Windrunner, the heroine who was qualified to have a statue in Stormwind City's King's Valley in history. If she was like those weak young ladies, she wouldn't be Aurelia, but some unknown and tragic noble daughter. Xueqi felt relieved. But he suddenly found that Aurelia had pulled down the blanket, once again showing her infinite beauty, and a naughty smile. You little brat, you cheated and used magic to bully the Great Demon King last night, didn't you? Now, the Great Demon King you speak of is going to counterattack. With that, Xueqi immediately felt a terrifying pressure, as if a mountain was pressing down on him. It was as long as 3 seconds. Aurelia was actually also an idiot. Xueqi had gone overboard, but so had she. It was as if she wanted the pain in her body to surpass the pain in her heart. She fought with all her might last night, but now she was in excruciating pain. She just wanted to bully Xueqi, but the moment she touched him, she rolled on the bed in pain. In the end, the two of them stared at each other until the sun was high up in the sky before they recovered. They tidied up their clothes in embarrassment, like prisoners going to the execution ground, facing the gazes outside. The only good thing was that there weren't many people outside, just two. One was the little handmaiden Vanessa, who was expressionless on the surface and looked at Xueqi as if she was looking at a villain, with disdain in her eyes. The other was Lucia, who was elegantly sipping the best black tea while waiting for Xueqi. Seeing Xueqi and Aurelia come out together, and glancing at their expressions, Lucia seemed to have an indescribable feeling. The eldest daughter of the Berev family adjusted her mentality well. She was still the dignified and generous Lucia, Xueqi's female disciple, and spokesperson at this moment. Lucia first bowed to Aurelia with the etiquette of a hostess, and then briefly explained what happened in the morning. "Prince Kale, that's came to see you this morning, master. I politely declined him on the grounds that you were using magic to communicate with the kings overnight for a war conference. In addition, there were 7 counselors who left visiting invitations and gifts, which I have temporarily put away for you. Finally, General Windsor wishes to receive your next instructions." Xueqi pondered for a moment. "It is also time for us to leave Quel Salis." Xueqi finished and looked at Aurelia. To be honest, Xueqi had enough of the High Elves' arrogance and various kinds of idiocy. If it was not for the 3 Windrunner sisters who shone in history, Xueqi would never have tolerated the High Elves' arrogance. The eldest sister, Aurelia, was one of the 5 heroes of the expeditionary army. The second sister, Sylvanas, ruled over the Forgotten in history, and later became the chief of the tribe. The third sister, Windsor, was the leader of the most hardcore hawks in the Alliance, the Silver Covenant, and was the vanguard against all kinds of foreign enemies and tribes. The 3 of them were the top talents, 1 in a million. If it was not for them, would Xueqi have come to suffer like this? However, it was time to leave now, and he had confirmed that most of these elves were fellows who deserved to die. Xueqi no longer had any reluctance to leave. Facing Xueqi's gaze, Aurelia took out a blue badge and wore it on the left shoulder of her ranger cloak. Aurelia said proudly, "I am Windrunner, the Ranger General under Grand Duke Marcus of Stormwind, Aurelia Windrunner." Chapter 409. The intensity of the war at the Dark Portal in the past 2 years was unprecedented. Although the commanders could see the decline of the Horde, on several battlefields, the alliance that was on the defensive seemed to be in danger. The bronze-bearded dwarves of the southernmost Iron Furnace Fort, Kilrog Deadeye of the Bloodring clan, had changed his strategy. He began to use iron from the iron mines to forge armors for the unworthy laborers in the eyes of the tribe. He completely armed them and used the method of exchanging lives for the bronze-bearded dwarves. In the southeast of Lordaeron, the earthy highlands had almost completely fallen. The Torrent Castle looked like it could fall at any time. The Horde transferred a large number of new warriors and laborers through the Dark Portal. Rend Blackhand was smart for once. He gave up on attacking the Torrent Castle and let the laborers dig into the mountain. The Torrent Castle was located on the largest hill of the earthy highlands. Except for a few places, most of the mountain roads to the Torrent Castle were more than 45 degrees. It was easy to defend and hard to attack. But digging into the mountain hit the Torrent Castle's weak spot. Without the support of the earth, the ground outside the Torrent Castle began to collapse. The sinking ground spread in all directions, and the houses overturned. A large amount of debris poured down to the foot of the mountain. The only good thing was that the Torrent Castle was the capital of the Arather Empire. Its defense was the best in the entire continent, and even in the world. From inside to outside, there were a total of 5 walls. Even if the outermost wall collapsed, there were still 4 walls. At this rate, the Torrent Castle could still hold on for about half a year. Located between the earthy highlands and the Hillsbrad Hills, the Horde's offensive was very fierce. Regardless of the quality of the soldiers, the Horde had brought more than 200,000 people. Under the continuous attacks of all kinds of newly built thick and hard siege weapons, General Abendus of Lordaeron could not hold on. Now, it was the allied forces of Lordaeron, Stormwind and Alterac who were guarding the Torrent Castle. Further north, near the holy city of Stratholme, Xueqi was at the northern watch tower. Now, the northern fortress was facing an unknown number of Horde. Xueqi was not sure if Orgrim's main force was in front of him. But Xueqi could not do anything about it. This was because the Horde's army was in Zul Moshar, which had always been the territory of the Mossflayer trolls. No one knew how Orgrim managed to convince the remaining Mossflayer trolls to join the Horde. In any case, there were trolls, ogres, Gorin, who was known as the Great Ogre, and a large number of Red Dragon Knights. A large number of elite troops of the tribe were there. Even if Xueqi launched a tentative attack, he would still suffer heavy losses. Duke told Qudrin to do a reconnaissance flight, but it turned into a large-scale aerial battle that caused the sky to dim and the earth to dim. The Alliance had lost close to 300 griffins. Of course, the Horde wasn't doing too well either. More than 100 red dragons had been killed. Just like that, on almost all fronts, the Alliance was forced into a passive defensive position. Every day, human lives were disappearing with the momentum of a broken dam. The distress letters from the front line flew to the two Alliance commanders like snowflakes. In fact, the war between the Alliance and the Horde was like two ferocious beasts tearing each other apart, constantly inflicting wounds on each other. Now, it was not a matter of who could deal the fatal blow to the other, but who could last longer. The last one standing in the duel ring would be the winner. Be it Anduin or Xueqi, they were both in a terrible state, but they had to appease the kings. Xueqi did not conjure up the magic lanterns of thousands of troops. In response to King Salas of Stormguard's request for help, Xueqi made Dai Linjun pay a little bit of money. Through the secret passage near the coast, he sent dozens of 7-pounder cannons that were originally used on warships to Stormguard. These 7-pounder cannons greatly increased the defense of Stormguard. At least against Gorin they were not that weak. As for King Eden of Alterac, Xueqi looked down on him. Damn it, the Horde has not even reached your borders yet. What do you mean by sending 10 distress letters every day? In fact, Xueqi also understood that when King Terenas forced a few lords to bring their weak private soldiers to join Xueqi had already completed the defense of the eastern plaguelands in the future. And the further west they went into the densely populated areas, the stronger the defense of the Kingdom of Rotterdam. Unless Orgrim and his 50,000 men could really overcome all the obstacles, it would only be a joke for them to fight their way through the entire eastern and western plaguelands and cross thousands of kilometers to reach the Kingdom of Rotterdam, which was located in the center of the Tirisful forest. Of course, Orgrim could also count on Grom to suddenly use the trapped Horde to break through the main force of the Kingdom of Rotterdam along the northern line of defense of the Silverpine Forest. On the March map, no one could imagine how the Horde would reach the Kingdom of Rotterdam. But there was actually a third way. That was to return to the hinterlands, go west through the Poison Fog Canyon and Icewind Mound, cross the Alterac Mountains, and reach the Kingdom of Rotterdam. Looking at this route, Xueqi was in a daze for a long time. In the end, he called Elugia over and handed her a letter that he had already written. Bring this letter to your father in Caer Darrow. Gavin Rad will accompany you. Remember, you are now the adjutant of the Alliance's deputy commander. If you are detained, if necessary, I will personally lead the army to get you back. Elugia was completely dumbfounded. What did Duke mean by this? Duke pulled Elugia over and whispered a few words into her ear. For the first time in her life, the eldest daughter of the Bear family, who had always looked calm and collected in the face of danger, fell into the deepest fear. Don't worry. Since I have foreseen it, this is just an insurance. Insurance? Elugia's lips were still pale. Yes. Don't worry. If it really happens, I have a way to turn the situation around. July 13th, Year 2 of the Dark Portal. Near Icewind Mound, the Horde's great chief Orgrim led his guards down a small mountain path towards a small valley below. It was late at night, a time when most people were already asleep. Orgrim also hated the lack of sleep. It made him seem irritable and not clear-headed. Unfortunately, there was an urgent matter waiting for him. Two tall and slender silhouettes appeared in front of Orgrim, causing his guards to jump in fright. He immediately realized that they were the troll scouts he had sent out. When it came to scouting, the agile trolls were obviously better than the clumsy and crude orcs. Therefore, when Orgrim found out that there was another group of trolls in Mossazal who were unwilling to follow Zujin, and that they could be recruited with some food, Orgrim did not hesitate to recruit more than 1,000 Mossflayer trolls. Great Chief, we found the target, the troll scout said. Chapter 4:10. It was a valley. To be more precise, it was not a valley. It was more like a small pit. It was about 6 meters wide and 5 meters deep. It was surrounded by cliffs and rocks, forming a perfect shelter. That was probably the reason why they chose to meet here. Orgrim and his two most trusted and powerful guards were hiding at the edge of the pit. His troll subordinates scattered a lot of leaves and smelly things on him. As much as the great chieftain disliked these things, he and his guards put up with it. Not long after, he heard a sound. Following the direction of the sound, Orgrim saw a creature the size of an orc laborer clumsily moving towards the bottom of the valley. Orgrim gripped the doomhammer in his hand tightly as he stared at the newcomer cautiously. The creature leaned against the cliff and panted heavily. Then it stood up and looked around. "Hey!" The cloaked figure called out softly. "I'm here," Orgrim replied. He stretched his body and crawled out from the pile of leaves to the empty area at the bottom of the valley. The mysterious figure stood up straight. When he got closer to the chief, his breathing quickened. Orgrim also noticed that there was a short axe hanging on the man's waist. It was a completely different item compared to the troll's junk. It was well made and had no signs of wear. It was obvious that the man had never used it before. Are you Doomhammer?" The man stammered, his body involuntarily shrinking back. "Can you speak the common language?" "I am Orgrim Doomhammer, the leader of the Blackrock clan, the chief of the tribe. I can understand your language." Orgrim used the standard common language to answer. "And you, are you the one who sent me the secret message?" This was a secret meeting. In theory, no third party would know about it. Unfortunately, this so-called theory was as clear as a lighthouse in the dark to a certain shameless transmigrator. In the hastily built northern fortress, Xueqi was sitting in the highest room in the highest tower. People in this era did not have the concept of ventilation. Xueqi only felt comfortable when he was at a high place. Xueqi lightly tapped the table with his index finger, as he felt the cold wind that almost forced its way in through the firing hole. A cold breeze blew past Xueqi's back. Xueqi didn't even turn his head to know who it was. "Yo, my dear, how was your harvest today?" Aurelia's face reddened. She pretended to be indifferent and snorted, "Humph. Who's your darling?" Xueqi face-bombed. He was also puzzled. How could a mature and beautiful domineering woman suddenly change into a tsundere? "But judging from your expression, you must have had a good harvest, right? Fortunately, I killed a few twin-headed ogres with my double arrow. Now they've all retreated into the mountain paths." The twin-headed ogre was very difficult to deal with. Not only was its skin thick enough to block ordinary swords, but it also had 2 heads and 3 hearts. Either one of its heads or all 3 hearts were pierced through. Otherwise, the ogre would not die. Xueqi had seen it with his own eyes. An ogre whose chest had been pierced by 2 crossbow bolts struggled to use a large wooden stick to break the crossbow bolts that were as thick as a human's arm. It got up and charged towards the humans for hundreds of meters before it was surrounded by a large group of soldiers with steel pikes. It was stabbed dozens of times before it died. Only someone like Aurelia, who had stepped into the realm of heroes, could deal with the twin-headed ogre easily. "Good job, kill more of them. It'll be much easier for us in the future." "Humph. It's your fault for not letting us in." Xueqi laughed. "I'm just afraid that you guys will kill them all too quickly. Then I won't be able to ask Tyrrhena's for more troops." Xueqi's way of doing things was a bit like raising bandits to protect himself. It was because of the threat of the horde that Xueqi and Tyrrhena's were able to force the lords of the eastern part of Lordaeron to pay up. These bastards knew that the Silver Pine Forest was under threat, but they were still slacking off. They didn't want to pay up, but they didn't want to. Now that the tribe was almost at their doorstep, these people panicked and hurriedly conscripted soldiers and paid up. Xueqi had all the manpower and money he wanted. Unfortunately, these lords were too late in mobilizing. They had gathered more than 40,000 people, but Xueqi found that only 1,000 of them were professional soldiers, less than 5,000 were militia who had received basic military training, and the remaining 30,000 were all farmers who had just washed their feet in the fields. The only good thing was that Lordaeron was so damn rich that they gave them 50,000 sets of armor and swords without any hesitation. These days, Xueqi had sent almost all of his subordinates who knew how to train soldiers to train these farmers. Aurelia didn't care either. She, her sisters, and more than 500 elven rangers slaughtered Zumashar's tribe every day. They only retreated when the horde sent out their wyverns. Hearing Xueqi say that he was afraid that they would wipe out the entire tribe, Aurelia couldn't take it anymore. "Hey, Aren't there more than 50,000 Horde's main force inside?
Orgrim ran away long ago.
There's nothing inside except for less than 3,000 elites. Ha! Aurelia exclaimed, and then her expression turned serious. Then why don't you go after the Horde?
It's not that I don't want to go, but I don't want to.
Xueqi took out a very official letter. Aurelia glanced at it. Your Majesty, Eden thinks that Alterac is not threatened by the Horde's army and refuses to let the Alliance in? The main force of the Horde is in Alterac. The female ranger was instantly agitated. What the hell? Why won't Eden let us in? Is he an idiot? Is he as arrogant as those damned Silver Moon counselors? How can a small mountain kingdom be so arrogant? Xueqi didn't say anything. He just opened a few magic images for Aurelia. When Illyria saw this, she immediately covered her mouth and cried out, "How tragic!" Yes, very tragic. These images showed the tragic situation in various parts of Lordaeron. The desolate land was dead silent. The land was an intoxicating green, but there were no signs of birds or beasts. On the image was a huge human town. Now, a large number of scavengers were gathering. Vultures, crows, wild dogs, maggots. There wasn't a single intact wall in the huge town, let alone a roof. The corpses of Alliance warriors were nailed to the walls with crude spears. Judging from their armor, they had all died in a fierce battle. But their corpses were desecrated. It was obvious that the Horde beast men had nailed them after they died. Chapter 4:11. In another scene, it was the once beautiful silver pine forest. All the trees had either been burned or chopped down to the last. Between the two huge camps, there was a dead, uninhabited area for more than 5 kilometers. The earth was completely scorched, and so were the corpses. There were rarely any corpses on the battlefield that weren't black. The fire burned almost everything. Any corpses that weren't collected on the same day would be burnt in the battle the next day. Almost everything was burned by the fire. Any corpses that weren't collected on the same day would be burnt in the battle the next day. Aurelia couldn't take it anymore. You're just going to leave your compatriots' corpses in the wilderness? Many times, the tribes attacked the farmers who collected the corpses, and even the ogres ate the farmers alive. Aurelia was disgusted. Apart from the Dalajan and Alterac, almost all the countries in the Alliance have been affected by the war. Every country has suffered great losses. Because of the conscription, a lot of land is unfarmed. It's not hard to imagine that the coming winter will be terrible. The elf's long eyebrows drooped. Then what happened to our people? Xueqi was satisfied that the beautiful elf used the word our. He waved his hand. Come here. Let's talk. I'm warning you, you're not allowed to freeze the road, Illyria added with a lingering fear. Xueqi was a little embarrassed. As long as you don't run away. Ever since that night in the state guesthouse, Aurelia seemed to have a shadow in her heart. She refused to let Xueqi follow her, and whenever Xueqi made a move, she would run away quickly. Promise me first. Aurelia emphasized. Okay, I won't force you. Xueqi made a gesture of surrender. Only then did Aurelia sit down. Xueqi said in a low voice, Actually, the situation in Stormwind is better than in most countries. Ha! Aurelia found it odd. Xueqi pointed at the map and said, The Hillsbrad Hills are one of the few areas that have not been affected by the war. Even though we have more than 600,000 refugees here, after we turn all the grasslands into fertile fields, we can basically have 80% of us become self-sufficient. Aurelia was about to ask what to do with the remaining 20%, but she suddenly realized that Xueqi was pointing at the western wilderness of the old Stormwind territory. Here. Yes, this is the place. Xueqi smiled mysteriously. The beast men are a hunting race. They like to eat meat. On their planet, there are many huge and extremely large prey. Usually, one is enough to feed hundreds of people for a few days. Therefore, in their eyes, only lands with large amounts of wild prey were good territories. The western wilderness is too barren for them. When Xueqi said this, Aurelia couldn't help but burst into laughter. She had been to the western wilderness. Other than having more small monsters such as gnolls and wild wolves, the open plains were definitely the best place for humans to farm. The Horde prefers the elven forest, so when I asked my subordinate Edwin Van Cleef to build a base behind the enemy lines, he forbade everyone from going near the elven forest to farm. A large number of sentries and warning systems were set up 100 kilometers away from the forest. The area 200 kilometers away from the forest up to the sea is the planting area. Xueqi took out a report and said, "This is the list of summer grain harvests. It's a pretty good result, enough for 600,000 people to eat for a year." Aurelia's beautiful eyes sparkled.
Farming under the eyes of the beastmen, Xueqi had thought of it and even done it.
In order to prevent the grain from spoiling due to moisture during shipping, I also invented a method to transport the grain in rubber bags after it is dried. This can reduce most of the wastage on the sea. Previously, every bag of wheat would spoil on the way. Now, only one bag spoils for every 10 bags. Sitting in front of Xueqi, Aurelia rested her elbows on her knees and cupped her face in her hands. She stared at Xueqi and said, "I really don't know where you get so many ideas from. Sigh, it's because you're so outstanding that I thought you were omnipotent."
Ahem.
Xueqi coughed dryly. "I'm not the god of creation. All right, in your expectations, can we kill all the horde?" Xueqi spread his hands and admitted, "We can win, but we can't kill them all. I've calculated that even if you kill every orc in the world of Azeroth, there are at least 2 million tribes on the planet called Draenor opposite the Dark Portal." Aurelia's expression was a little gloomy. "However, I will let the flag of the Alliance be planted in every corner of Azeroth as much as possible." At this time, a slim figure appeared at the top of the stairs. Aurelia frowned and said, "Sylvanas, how many times have I told you that our identities are different now? You have to knock on the door to see Xueqi." "I really want to knock, but what if I miss something good?" Queen Sylvanas had a sly smile on her face. Aurelia blushed and bit her lip gently. "Sister, that's enough." Xueqi smiled and asked, "Sylvanas, what's the matter?" "Nothing, I just want to confirm whether our Windrunner family's ranger is your free mercenary, or is he really your vassal?" "Sister, don't cause trouble for Xueqi." Aurelia was a little anxious. She thought that Xueqi was just helping her out that day. After all, in the human kingdom, there had never been a precedent of conferring a high elf as a hereditary noble. Queen Sylvanas shrugged and said, "We have more than 200 people joining. Many of them are just looking for hope. It's not like I want to ask. It's fine as long as I have a forest."
"Oh, I see.
"Then I'll just give it to you all."
Xueqi was prepared and took out a document.
"Can one of you please call Sasha and Lilith over as well?" The Windrunner sisters were dumbfounded. This was a conferring document personally signed by King Lang Rin. As an almost independent duke, Xueqi had the power to confer titles below baron, but viscounts and counts had to be approved by the king. In this era, the nobles were the vassals of the king's vassals, not the king's vassals. Xueqi could have no more than 3 counts as his direct vassals, and Xueqi's vassals did not have to follow the king's orders. The Windrunner sisters did not expect Xueqi to move so quickly and actually get the document approved. Aurelia was the Countess of the East Elven Forest. Sylvanas was the Countess of the East Twilight Forest. Sasha's fief was the original Steel Lake, now Wind Lake, so she was the Countess of Wind Lake. Lilith's fief was the Blackwell Pumpkin Farm, so she was the Baroness of Blackwell. All hereditary titles. Chapter 4:12. Wow, it's an official hereditary title? Then I'm a lord now too?
Ha ha ha.
The third sister, Sasha, was the most excited. She took the document and looked at it carefully again and again. After confirming it, she was so happy that she spun around a few times. Lilith accepted it calmly and then bowed to Xueqi. Sylvanas put her hands on her hips and pouted. "Xueqi, you're so bad. You always give us land that's still under the control of the orcs." "I can't help it. The Horde's goal is to conquer the entire planet. If we don't defeat the Horde, no one in the Alliance will have a good time. The only thing I still have in my hands is Karazhan. How about I split it into a few layers for you?" Duke looked helpless. "Humph. I wouldn't want that creepy wizard tower even if you gave it to me." Sylvanas didn't have any bad intentions. She was just complaining. "If you don't want your land, then give it back to me." Xueqi purposely provoked Queen Sylvanas. Sylvanas stuck out her tongue. "I'm not doing it. If I really give it back to you, won't I have to work for you for nothing? No, I have to show off in front of my subordinates."
With that, she ran away like the wind.
"Wait, I'll go too." Sasha didn't want to be left behind and ran away too. Lilith silently bowed to Duque again and then left the tower with small steps. Thus, only Aurelia and Duque were left. Aurelia suddenly realized something. Her expression changed. Duque, aren't you giving us most of your land?
Duque laughed and pointed at the map. No, to be honest, I don't care about land at all.
In fact, Lang doesn't mind me being a king either. But when the enemy is right in front of us, it's not a good thing to split up and establish a country. Aurelia nodded. The strength of the various countries had already been weakened badly enough.
If they still established a country and divided the manpower and resources of the various countries, they would be the sinners of humanity and even the entire alliance.
Actually, Duque was ridiculing in his heart. The Burning Legion's invasion is almost certain. Do you think I'll just casually establish a country and court death? However, it's impossible for my territory to be so small. Duque pointed at the bottom right corner of the southern continent map of the Eastern Kingdom, where the Horde's base camp, the Swamp of Sorrows, and the newly renamed Blasted Land were marked. If we can successfully drive the Horde back to their homeland, but we can't destroy the Dark Portal, then there will be a problem. Who will guard the Dark Portal?
The two of them had an answer in their hearts.
It was definitely the Alliance, and it was most likely someone from Stormwind. It's either me or Lothar who's guarding this place. With the strange magical properties of the Dark Portal, I'm the only one in command. In exchange, Lang will definitely allow me to link my territory together. Duque drew a big circle with his right index finger. On the original foundation, he added the Reed Ridge Mountain, the conquered Swamp of Sorrows, and the northern part of the Blasted Land. Although Duque's territory was larger than many of the territories of the kings in the Alliance, Aurelia could tell at a glance that this was a hard job. This meant that if the Horde were to make any trouble, the one to bear the brunt would be Duque. At this moment, Aurelia looked at Duque as if she was looking at a saint. Duque, you're so great. With great power comes great responsibility. For the happiness of our descendants, we can only take on more responsibilities. Duque deliberately used the moral integrity of a Mediv. At this moment, Duque was a saint. Duque was the savior. For a moment, Duque was almost moved by himself. But, wait, our children and grandchildren? No wonder you're a hereditary count. You've never intended to give up your title and territory. Sweat. Sweat. Waterfall of sweat. Super sweat. This was why it was bad for a woman to be too smart. One of the reasons why Duque was so generous with his land was that he didn't want the fertile water to flow into other people's fields. Perhaps, if he had a child with Aurelia, wouldn't the future lord be surnamed Du? Now it was seen through. No, I really didn't think that much. I'm just thinking of your people. Sometimes, an explanation was a cover-up was a lie, and a lie was a conspiracy. Great. Don't tell me you want to make a move on my sisters? Are you itching for a beating? You haven't even taken care of me, the great Demon King, and you're thinking so much. Wait. Why did the topic change so much? I really don't have any thoughts about your sisters. I swear. Then, he didn't know what happened. In order to prove his innocence, Duque kissed her. Aurelia seemed to be a little angry at first, but under the passionate kiss, her eyes gradually blurred. Then, for some reason, it became the second round of the Brave versus the Demon King. The battle with Aurelia was a private matter, after all. Following that, Duke began to make his preparations in secret. If he didn't guess wrong, that major event in history happened recently. It was the 16th of July. On this day, the entire Lordaeron continent was still filled with the flames of war, but the king of Alterac, Eden Pirinold, suddenly called for an emergency meeting. All Alterac generals and nobles above the count rank had to attend. You summoned us, your majesty? The one who spoke was General Haas, the commander-in-chief of Alterac's army. He stood at the half-open door of the palace. A group of generals stood behind the muscular General Haas. Through the wide-open door, they saw all the upper-class nobles of Alterac, led by Duke Barov, who had the most prestigious position among them, gathered together. Haas frowned slightly. He saw that the nobles had the same doubts as them. What matter would require all the nobles and generals to be gathered? If it was to allocate military funds or recruit militia, there was no need to summon all the important people in the military and government. The generals and nobles had a bad feeling. Come in, my generals. Eden spoke loudly.
Everyone could feel that the king was trying to calm his voice, but it seemed to be unsuccessful. I just received an authoritative report that the main force of the horde is indeed marching towards us.
And the leader is their strongest chief, or Grim Doomhammer. They've obviously chosen to cross the mountains to the north of Alterac to attack Lordaeron. This way, they'll be able to pass through the defensive line built by that brat Duque and approach Lordaeron from the southeast. Everyone immediately turned their attention to the huge map hanging on the side of the palace. It was so impressive that it covered the entire wall.
Eden's voice sounded again. Now we have two choices. One is to face the invincible main force of 50,000 with less than 5,000 men, and the other is...
Chapter 4:13. What was the second choice? When the first choice was made, everyone present realized what the so-called second choice was.
Almost every noble and every general's face instantly turned as pale as a dead man's, without the slightest hint of blood.
Traitor? How could this be?
It wasn't that no one had ever been a traitor before.
The Blood Sail pirates had done so, but it was later proven that they had been blackmailed.
Not only did Deputy Commander Duque prove it, but the Blood Sail fleet had also sent over 100,000 beastmen to the bottom of the sea to wash away their shame.
Now their king was hinting for Alterac to surrender, or even worse, seek refuge with the horde? How could this be?
General Haas stood up straight, his heavy breathing causing his thick beard to flutter. We are part of the 9 nations of the Alliance.
We have sworn to fight against the evil horde with the other nations. Alliance? What can the Alliance do?
King Eden waved his arms anxiously.
I've sent 15 urgent letters to Lothar for help. Lothar told me every time that the Alliance's front line in the Silver Pine Forest was unable to transfer more troops, and hoped that Alterac would coordinate with Deputy Commander Marcus. At this point, every general and noble pricked up their ears. All right, I used the most humble tone to ask for help from that brat who doesn't even have hair on his mouth. Guess how he dealt with me? 10,000 Stormwind soldiers and 10,000 Lordaeron soldiers? Damn it! They were still peasants 3 weeks ago, and it would take at least a week for them to reach Alterac. Bastard! The horde's main force is right under our noses. Duke Barev's eyebrows twitched.
General Haas seemed to want to defend Duque. Your Majesty, you know that Alterac's mountain roads have always been terrible.
From receiving the news to sending reinforcements, Sir Marcus has already done his best. Shut up! Has Eden questioned loudly. Detecting the enemy's movements is that brat's responsibility. If he can't do it, then he's neglecting his duty. Where are they now when Alterac needs the Alliance? Let me tell you, not here. 7 days? Will they come to collect our corpses in 7 days? Faced with the threat of death, the nobles of Alterac trembled. We can hold our ground with Alterac's terrain. Hold fast. The king sneered. His next move made their fear rise to another level.
With a wave of his hand, a frozen orc specimen that had been dead for a long time was pushed in from the side door by the guards on a cart.
Eden gave a vivid example of what all the noble beastmen looked like. My God! They're as tall as the trolls, but as sturdy as 2 trolls. Damn, look at his muscles, his sharp fangs, will he eat people? When the 3 guards forcefully brought in a huge warhammer and threw it on the ground, the floor tiles were smashed to pieces. All the nobles' faces were drained of blood. Their eyes bulged as they stared at the cracks spreading on the floor tiles. The king's voice rang out again. Do you see that? My vassals! It takes 3 people to lift their warhammers, but these guys are swinging our shields effortlessly like children's toys. No one could stop them. 7 days? What a joke. 7 days is enough for them to kill us all 3 times over. They've already destroyed Stormwind City, half of Cuel Salis, and swept through the earthy highlands. If we don't do something, their next target will be Alterac. A trembling noble asked, the Stormwind soldiers within our borders really can't do anything? When Lang's Stormwind army needed help, Alterac gave them food and even gave them their own land to take refuge. What did Lang do to us? For the sake of the Holy Light, they actually took root on the land we lent them for refuge. At this point, the nobles' expressions turned ugly. It would have been fine if it was just to save the refugees. As long as they blocked the food supply, they could force the people of Stormwind to become cannon fodder. But now, they saved the refugees, but the refugees seem to have taken over the land and refused to leave. Opening up land and building a city, making their camp stronger than the broken ridge castle on Alterac Mountain. Wasn't this like saving a bandit, and the owner was chased out? We joined the alliance to obtain the power to protect our kingdom, but now that the horde is right under our noses, where is our precious alliance? They've already abandoned us. Don't you understand? He knew that his voice was close to hysteria, and he tried to calm down. It's time for every kingdom to think for themselves. I have to think of Alterax's interests first. Any other king would have done the same. King Aiden's words made sense, and the nobles and generals were speechless for a moment. Alterac was the smallest of the 7 human kingdoms, with less than 10,000 soldiers. After losing a few regiments, Alterac was left with 5,000 soldiers and less than 100,000 citizens. They were no match for the horde's ferocious main force. My generals, my vassals, the situation has changed, Aiden reminded everyone. Noticing that he was sweating as well. Almost everyone noticed it too. We don't have many choices. For example, Alterac will no longer be a part of the alliance. Believe me, this is pretty much the only option for us. For example, a non-aggression treaty. We will not disturb their advance in the mountains, and they will guarantee that Alterac will remain unscathed. Everyone below was shocked, and a violent uproar quickly spread. Most of the generals seemed to have fallen into disgust, anger, or sorrow, while the nobles looked uncertain. Your Majesty, you're forcing us to become the slaves of those cruel, bloodthirsty beasts who only know how to slaughter cities. Sign a contract with those beasts. Your Majesty, are you sure they won't get hungry and eat us first? Aiden sharply noticed the shift in the vassal's thoughts. I'm glad that the horde's chief, Orgrim Doomhammer, is a wise leader who speaks the common tongue. I've obtained his promise not to attack us in exchange for us not cutting off their advance. Please note that we no longer have a choice. Everyone, please sign this contract to agree to our next actions. Let us Alterac embrace our destiny together. Chapter 4:14. No. I'm against this plan. Haas stepped forward agitatedly, but he was stopped by over 10 fully armed royal guards. I won't agree. Alterac's soldiers won't agree either. Then we'll use the excuse of shifting our defenses and send them away. King Eden said coldly. No. I'm still against it. Haas was held down by several guards. He struggled and roared, this is blasphemy against the entire human race. Shut up. Haas. You swore to be loyal to me, even to the ends of hell. General Haas was stunned. Can we trust the chief of the tribe? A low-ranked noble, Valander, asked. His words represented the thoughts of many nobles. Seeing many nodding, Eden sighed in relief. If they asked this, it meant that they had already accepted the agreement. The only thing stopping them was their doubts about whether it could be carried out. We have no choice. Eden replied slowly, as long as they want, unless they give up on Alterac, we and everything we have will be destroyed. Of course, if they go back on their word, we'll still be finished. But if they stick to their word, Alterac will live. No matter what the price is. All right, make your choice. Gentlemen. Eden waved his hand, and over 100 royal guards rushed out from the side door, surrounding all the generals and nobles. No one knew what the consequences of refusing to sign the agreement would be, but it obviously wouldn't be anything good. It was obvious that the king had spoken to his hardcore faction. Over a third of the nobles and generals signed the agreement, stating that they unconditionally agreed to all of the king's policies against the alliance. They signed their names and stamped the wax. Once they sat on the king's chariot, it meant that once Eden officially fell out with the alliance, they would have to bear responsibility as well. The remaining 2/3 were hesitant. The neutral faction and Duke Barov's connections all looked at the other person in power in the kingdom. Duke Barov, whose power was second only to Eden. Duke Barov, who had been silent all this time, slowly raised his head like a rusty machine. The Barov family objects. Perhaps it was because of fear, but his voice was clearly trembling. It did not sound like his previous voice. Eden didn't mind. Anyone's voice would change under extreme anxiety and panic. Eden stroked the hilt of the sword at his waist and let out a long sigh. My old friend, I'm sorry I didn't discuss this with you beforehand. From the way I see it, you've already made your choice when you gave little Elusia to that brat who stole the highest position in the alliance. Your heart is no longer with Alterac. Are you planning to ally with those damned refugees to steal Alterac's land and throne? Like a bolt from the blue, Duke Barov was completely stunned. He looked at the king but could not say a word. "I'm sorry, but you can no longer represent the Barov family." The king clapped his hands, and two teenagers appeared from the side hall. Prince Barov stared at him with wide eyes. 15-year-old Wilton Barov and Alex Barov, the only two heirs to the Barov family. Now, they actually went over to the king's party. Wilton grinned hideously. "Father, you're old. It's time to hand over the Barov family to us." Alex did not hide her anger at all. "Father, you've gone mad. You're trying to hand over the family to Alusia, to that bastard Duque, and you won't even leave the family to us?" Prince Barov raised the forefinger of his right hand, and pointed it tremblingly at the emperor. A foul breath stuck in his throat, and he still could not utter a word. The outcome had been decided. Nobles were very particular about bloodlines. No matter how much Duke Barov struggled, he could not escape the shackles of his bloodline. Just as the old duke knelt down, almost all the nobles and generals stepped forward to sign their names and stamp their seals. Prince Barov's two good sons did the same thing, in their father's presence, with great pride. King Eden, who had gained the support of everyone except Haas and the old duke, was obviously in high spirits. He showed everyone his excellent political skills. He showed everyone what it meant to turn the situation around. "Everyone, I did not mean to force you. If I had a choice, I would not serve those horrible beasts. The contract signed by all of you is just insurance." "Insurance? Do you understand?" Everyone looked at King Eden in bewilderment. Eden finally showed his best actor talent. "In fact, I have already informed Tarinas about the Horde's main forces attack. I told him that if he did not have reinforcements, I would give up defending and let the Horde charge into Lordaeron." In the end, Tarinas sent his last group of court mages and a group of high-grade swordsmen as soon as possible. "I'm going to let them destroy the Horde's path." General Haas, who was kneeling on the ground, suddenly looked up. His eyes were full of hope. "Your Majesty, you were just lying to us? You're not going to fulfill your promise?" "That's right. We don't have to fulfill our promise to those despicable beasts." Eden waved his right index finger proudly. "No, I've already told Orgrim about the arrival of Lordaeron's reinforcements, including their numbers and types of troops." The entire hall fell into a dead silence. Eden's expression was incomparably cold and cruel. He raised the contract signed by the generals and nobles. "Let them fight to the death. If Tarinas' elites win, I'll burn this contract. No one will believe the evidence provided by those beasts." Many people heaved a sigh of relief when Eden said this. If the Horde is really that strong and kills all of Tarinas' elites, then we've done our duty as allies since we informed Orgrim. We can join the Horde without worry. If the Horde won, wouldn't that mean that the last of Lordaeron's elite guards had been destroyed? What difference was there between Lordaeron and a weak girl who could be raped at will? Hiss. In the main hall, there were countless sounds of inhaling cold air. They suddenly realized that this was the king they were familiar with, the cunning and astute king. Regardless of the situation, Alterac would be the winner. For a time, the hall was filled with heated discussions. Almost every noble and general had a smile on their faces. To be able to turn such a huge crisis into a sure win, as expected of His Majesty. As expected, this is the way of survival for us Alterac. A group of people complimented King Eden as sickeningly as they could. At this time, Eden suddenly received a message. The Horde's messenger had arrived. Chapter 4:15. Eden frowned as he listened to the servant's words. This wasn't within his expectations. He ordered the guard, "Tell the tribe's envoy to wait for a while and arrange for them to be in the secret parlor. I'll meet them later." What the king didn't expect was that the moment he finished speaking, a voice that sounded like a human's voice came from the entrance of the hall. Didn't King Pirol decide to make Alterac the strongest member of the tribe? As a member of the tribe, there shouldn't be anything you need to hide from me, right? The 15-meter-tall, 3-meter-wide door was kicked open. Accompanied by this rumble, a loud and clear commotion suddenly came from outside the huge castle, followed by the sound of countless giant birds flapping their wings in the wind. The tribe's envoy appeared under everyone's panicked gaze. What envoy? That was a joke. No envoy would be as burly as this orc, emitting such a terrifying aura. He had reddish-brown skin that was different from most orcs, and he carried a huge black square hammer on his shoulder. The most frightening thing was that the hammer was stained with incomparably fresh flesh. With every step he took, a drop of blood or a small piece of flesh would fall from the hammer. Who are you? For a moment, the king almost wanted to order his guards to kill him. An orc had entered Alterak's palace, and if he was allowed to leave in such a dignified manner, it would be like mud falling on his pants. This was completely out of Eden's expectations. The consequence of this was that Alterak could only follow the tribe to the very end. The huge orc grinned, revealing a mouthful of intimidating fangs. Aiden Pirinold, didn't you send a messenger to pledge your loyalty to me? My subject, I'm only here to express my joy at receiving your loyalty. Is that wrong? The king's face turned pale, cold sweat drenching his luxurious clothes. Orgrim Doomhammer. Eden's teeth chattered as a magical name leaked out from the cracks of his mouth. Who would have thought that the great chief of the tribe would come to visit in person? Was this a forced abdication or a showdown? Or was it both? Heh. Aiden, my loyal subject, thank you for your information. Along with Orgrim's mocking words, a burly orc beside Orgrim, who had a severed hand and had turned his hand into a giant toothed blade, threw out a head with a sinister smile. It was Chaz Mat, King Menethil's personal court archmage. Someone recognized the severed head. At this moment, Eden felt that all the sweat he had shed had been frozen by the cold air. It's over. It was all over. He didn't expect that the tribe, which was supposed to be 2 days away from them, would organize a sneak attack. Now that even the Radiant Moon Mage leading the team had been killed, the mages from the Rotterdam Kingdom who had been arranged to camp at the north of the Shattered Ridge were probably dead. Eden simply couldn't imagine how the tribe had managed to do all this without making a sound. However, it was clear that Orgrim's preemptive move had disrupted all his plans. Now, he only had 2 choices left. One was to resist and let Orgrim, who was already prepared, destroy his entire family. The other was to keep his promise and let Alterak join the tribe, and then walk all the way to the dark side. In the future, he would either be destroyed by the victorious alliance, or he would join the tribe and beg the tribe to give him a piece of meat after conquering the world. In fact, it wasn't just Eden's subjects who were hesitating. Eden himself was also hesitant. Even though Orgrim was considered a handsome man among the beast men, he was still too ugly and horrifying in the eyes of the humans. Eden couldn't help but shiver when he thought about how he had to lower himself to work for such a terrifying fellow. He couldn't help but feel a wave of unwillingness rise from the bottom of his heart as he stared at those mottled, sharp teeth. What if he could capture the chief of the tribe and use him as a hostage to prevent the tribe from attacking until the alliance's reinforcements arrived? If he succeeded, he, Eden Pyreus, would undoubtedly become a great hero of the alliance and the savior of the human world. His Alterak's reputation would greatly increase, and it would become a powerful country on par with Lordaeron. This idea was so tempting that it made Eden's heart palpitate. He couldn't help but glance at the royal guards who had already drawn their swords and were waiting by the side of the hall. Dreams were beautiful, but reality was cruel. Eden, who had tried to play both sides, didn't even get 2 seconds before his dream of being a hero was shattered mercilessly. A green claw landed on his shoulder, the sharp tip of the claw pressing against Eden's artery. A huge invisible figure appeared beside the king of Alterak. Ah! Eden let out a low cry. It was a sword sage of the Fireblade clan. He had the ability to become invisible, and he roamed the Alliance's command center all year round, killing many mid-level and low-level commanders. He was a notorious sword sage in the Alliance. All of a sudden, everyone was stunned. This mysterious green-skinned sword saint did not kill him immediately. Instead, he reached into King Eden's robes and took out the contract signed by all the nobles and generals in the kingdom. He then threw the contract to Orgrim, who was standing at the entrance of the hall. Everyone only saw a blur, and the contract was already in Orgrim's hands. The chief opened it briefly, and a satisfied smile appeared on his face. The entire Alterak had fallen into the hands of the Horde. Whether it was to be destroyed or used, it was all up to Orgrim. Thank you all for your loyalty to the Horde and to me. I can make this promise as the great chief of the Horde. When the Horde rules over the world of Azeroth, everyone here will automatically become the Horde's agents to control the human world. A slap in the face, a carrot in the mouth. After intimidating them and controlling the situation, Orgrim cleverly adopted a more conciliatory approach. Rule over the human world. below only one and above tens of thousands. It had to be said that this promise was indeed a beautiful blueprint for the Alterac nobles who had suffered for a long time in the 7 human kingdoms and had been ignored by the major countries for a long time. At least they had something to look forward to. All of a sudden, the eyes of the nobles lit up. Right at this moment, a teasing voice suddenly sounded out. "Yo, Orgrim, you're digging up the Alliance's foundation right in front of me. You really don't take me or the Alliance seriously." Chapter 4:16. Before he heard the voice, Orgrim had already prepared a script in his mind to give an impassioned speech. The humans slandered us for being barbaric, bloodthirsty, cannibalistic and massacring, but it was actually the remnants of the southern kingdom that spread the rumors. He could brag however he wanted, as long as the humans did as he wanted and started a peasant uprising in the Hillsbrad Hills. This would hold back the troops and attention of the Stormwind and Dalaran kingdoms, so that the main force of the Horde could successfully take down Lordaeron. As for what would happen to the people of Alterac, Orgrim couldn't be bothered to care. He had hoped countless times that his opponent would be a straightforward warrior. Only then would he be able to show off his and the orc's bravery. It was a pity that apart from Lothar, who seemed to have the courage to fight head-on, he only met Duke from the start to the end. In the eyes of the beastmen, Duke was extremely despicable, but it was undoubtedly a very effective strategy to kill the beastmen. Since the human commander was so despicable, Orgrim didn't mind using the same method to deal with the humans. Conquering a human kingdom without shedding a drop of blood. Even if it was the smallest human kingdom. This achievement was exactly what Orgrim, who was in desperate need of glory, needed. He needed this achievement to prove himself. After all, the continuous defeats had tarnished his reputation. When Orgrim met the messenger, he was afraid that it was a trap, but he also wanted to control Alterac. That was why he mobilized so many powerful chiefs and heroes, and even used Zulahid's Dragon Knights to hold the fort. Everything went smoothly, and he easily subdued that sly and cunning king. But he didn't expect to hear the voice that he didn't want to hear the most, the voice of the Alliance's vice-commander, Duke Marcus. Not only did Orgrim's expression change, but Eden and Haas's expressions also changed. As people who had dealt with Duque many times, they could obviously recognize Duque's voice. But they didn't expect Duque's voice to come from Duke Barov. Duke Barov straightened his body. His face was full of mockery and confidence. Under everyone's astonished gazes, a wave of water-like ripples appeared on his body. The slightly plump elderly figure quickly disappeared, revealing a robust young man dressed in a blue and white robe. Illusion? How was this possible? It wasn't just the inexperienced orcs, even the upper echelons of Alterac were shocked. They could accept the fact that Duque had fooled them with his perfect makeup. It wasn't that the nobles hadn't seen illusions before, but those crude and immobile illusions were worlds apart from Duque's lifelike illusions. The most common type of illusion was the kind that attempted to conceal a certain secret passage. When had he ever seen an illusion with so many facial expressions? Just how high was Duque's attainments in magic as a mere morning star? What's more, Duque's appearance at the most critical moment made them have no choice but to add the word inconsolable to their shock, turning it into inconsolable. Orgrim was decisive. Not only was he wise in history, he was also an absolute opportunist. Playing dirty was definitely the chief's specialty. In this life, Duque didn't give him the chance to sneak up on the Blackhand Great Chief. However, that didn't mean that Orgrim wasn't sinister. Without even a greeting, Orgrim gave a look and a sword saint of the Fireblade clan came out of stealth, slashing at the back of Duque's neck with a sharp long sword. At the same time, Orgrim used charge, his burly reddish-brown body turning into a blinding ray of light as he charged at Duque. That's right. He wanted to kill Duque in an instant. He wanted to nip Duque, the biggest factor of instability, in the bud. After all, everyone present was a human, and his men had yet to completely control the palace. If Duque, the vice-commander of the Alliance, was allowed to raise his arm here, things would definitely develop in a direction that was disadvantageous to the tribe. However, he had miscalculated. Under the fierce attack of his giant hammer, it missed and clashed with the long sword of the Fireblade clan sword saint in mid-air. The sword saint who was hurriedly retracting his attack was sent flying. Duque, who was supposed to be killed between the hammer and the long sword, turned into a ray of light and disappeared into the air. Or was it an illusion? Not good. Orgrim suddenly reacted and used his fastest speed to turn his neck towards Samuro, who was controlling the King of Eden. Unfortunately, before he could shout "Be careful," Samuro was already hit. Fast. Too fast. No one expected Duque to be this decisive.
The moment he appeared, Duke had already disappeared from where he stood.
The sorcerer's arcane spell, invisibility, gave Duque the ability to become invisible for a short period of time. The sorcerer's invisibility did not have the stealth and movement acceleration ability of the Sword Saint's wind step. However, Duque had been strengthened by the storm altar. The system notification in Duque's retina showed the following information. You have used the new skill, Gale Step. You can enter invisibility for up to 60 seconds. In invisibility, you can gain twice the movement speed and use Flash once without breaking the invisibility. When you make your first ice attack, your critical hit rate is 100% and your magic flying speed is increased by 50%. Duque's movement speed was not fast. In this state, Duque could run 100 meters in 10 seconds without any obstacles. Unfortunately, his agility was too low and he did not have good dynamic vision. This speed had to be discounted, especially in crowded places where it was easier to bump into them. Even so, it was still very scary. Duque raised his hand and cast an ice tornado in his invisible state, sending Samuro, who was caught off guard, flying. Originally, Duque wanted to kill Samuro instantly. Unfortunately, a hero was a hero. Even when he was being ambushed, Samuro was still able to use the mirror image spell in a split second in the eyes of bystanders. The ice tornado, which was strengthened by ice shield and icicle, if both hit, with the Sword Saint's high attack and low defense, it would not be strange to kill him instantly. However, Samuro's mirror image spell prevented Duque's ice tornado from being fully effective. Even if it hit, it was only to the extent of hurting Samuro and sending him flying. Of course, at the last moment, Duque used an ice wall to block Samuro's slash towards the Eden King, scaring the Eden King half to death. In an instant, the situation reversed. It was Duque's turn to smile and put his hand on the Eden King's shoulder. "For the Alliance," Duque shouted. Instantly, a group of killing gods charged in from the hall and the side door. Orgrim's expression changed. Chapter 4:17. In order to reclaim Alterac this time, Orgrim had put in a lot of effort.
Other than Gul'dan and Gujar, who were nowhere to be found, and Grom Hellhound, who was guarding the main camp in Silverpine Forest, who was unable to move, Orgrim had practically brought all of the tribe's most capable chiefs and heroes here through the Wyverns. The one commanding the Wyvern army in the sky was naturally Zulud.
On Orgrim's left was the chief of the Shattered Palm clan, Kargath Bladefist. On the right was the chief of the Blood Ring clan, Kilrog Deadeye. Outside the hall was the chief of the Black Scar clan, Cashdrake, and a new hero, Rexer. Rexer was one of the greatest heroes of the tribe in the future. Rexer was the product of a union between an orc and an ogre. He grew up in the Mok Nathal clan of Draenor. Even though he was of mixed blood, his burly physique and amazing strength allowed him to shine during the Horde's invasion of Azeroth. This time, Orgrim had specially brought him here. Including Samuro, there were a total of 7 super killing gods from the tribe who could easily fight against 1,000 men on their own. Under normal circumstances, these 7 guys were enough to destroy the entire Alterac. Unfortunately, they had encountered Duque, who was also prepared to go all out. In the sky, Zulud suddenly discovered a large flock of griffins swooping down from the clouds. The Dragonmaw clan's dragon riders didn't even have time to react before they were smashed by a large number of storm hammers. It was true that dragons were the overlords of the sky, but they had a blind spot in their vision, and that was their backs. Without the coordination of the orc cavalrymen, the Crimson Dragons attacked the griffins on their own. This mistake caused the dragon riders' losses to increase dramatically. Cashdrake and Rexer, who were waiting outside the hall, thought that they only needed to deal with a few die-hard Bear of Clan guards. The 2 of them and the dozen orc elites they brought with them made a grave mistake. After the illusions on the guards were removed, Chen Fan's eyes widened. They found that the guards opposite them were all their old enemies, the Silverhand Knights. It was fine if the Silverhand came, but more than half of the first-generation paladins were here. Uther, Sidan Dathrahan, Tyrion Fordring, Gavin Rad Doom, Bolvar for Dragon. Most of these fellows had proven their bravery in the Silverpine Forest and other battlefields. After fighting for so long, all the weaklings would be eliminated in the first 3 battles.
Most of the time after fighting for so long, it would be discovered that the strongest ones were still the same few.
Even if he didn't completely remember the other party's name, he would be able to recognize it as soon as he saw it. It's that bastard again. And so on. Everyone in the horde agreed that the first-generation Holy Knights were the strongest. If it was just the Silver Hand, the heroes of the horde would not have such a headache. The most ridiculous thing was that the 4 Windrunner sisters had all come. Paladins were famous for being able to fight, tank, and consume energy. However, paladins also had a well-known shortcoming: short legs. If the heroes of the horde really wanted to run, the paladins wouldn't be able to stop them. Well, now there was a group of ranger heroes who could run as fast as they could. Even if Kargath and Kilrog charged out, they still felt like they couldn't hold them off. In just a single exchange, several elite captains of the horde with dozens of lives on their hands were shot to death by the Windrunner sisters. The horde was at a great disadvantage against the heroes summoned by Xueqi, but it was a great advantage against the other humans. Especially the Alterac royal family's guards. They were completely dumbfounded. Before this, they had been clearly told by Eden that they were going to rely on the horde. That was why the heroes and followers of the horde were like fathers in their eyes. Who knew that the horde would just kill them like pigs and dogs? Orgrim glanced at Xueqi, who was beside the throne, and sighed in his heart. I've miscalculated. If Samuro was still controlling King Eden, then this would be the best time to force the Alterac people to rebel. But now it was Xueqi who had Eden's life in his hands. Eden was of course not an idiot. Xueqi had saved his life from Samuro's hands, but it wasn't just to save him. Did he really think that Xueqi was some bullshit saint? Whether he and his Alterac were willing or not, they were now sitting on the Alliance's chariot once again. Jump out of the chariot? Sure. Go and die now.
As an overly shrewd, two-faced king, Eden shouted the moment he was sure of his own safety. For the Alliance.
Kill those damned horde. As expected of the best actor.
Just a moment ago, he was saying, I love you, Daddy of the Horde. But now he was shouting, Grandpa Alliance is my real ancestor. He said it so smoothly, and his expression did not change, as if it was only right and proper.
Even the most seasoned politician would be ashamed of himself. But he shouted in a dignified manner. Even when he saw Orgrim's infamous hammer of destruction smashing down on his head, and the huge black square mace rapidly expanding in his vision, he didn't change his words. Because King Eden had made his bet. It was true that Orgrim was powerful and could force Eden into a corner. But Xueqi was clearly superior. This kind of frightening method wasn't something a 16-year-old should be capable of. Eden couldn't turn back this time. He could only hope to keep Orgrim here and get a decent result.
Then, he would think of a way to bribe Xueqi to make sure that no one in the Alliance would pursue him and Alterac.
Xueqi appeared once again with Eden in a flash.
In a flash of light, Eden was brought from his throne by Xueqi to the door of the side hall on the right.
That was how agile a mage was when fighting a warrior. Xueqi smiled and waved at Orgrim. Then, he raised his hand, and a 10-meter-tall 2-meter-thick wall of ice separated the Orgrim tribe from the Alterac nobles. Hurry up and retreat! Xueqi's shout finally woke up the frightened nobles. These people who claimed to be nobles weren't as noble as the commoners thought they were. One by one, they fled in panic towards the side door where Xueqi was. Yes, with Xueqi blocking the tribe's way to the main hall, that was the only way out. Everyone fought to be the first to run in that direction. And then, a storm began to rise. The Sword Saints' Blade Storm. Under Eden's frightened and wandering gaze, all of Alterac's upper nobles were cut to pieces by a beastman sword saint that had been hiding near the side door. Broken limbs, flying blood, minced flesh. The nobles who had once gathered under Eden's command and were viewed as his most important pillars had been completely wiped out in front of him. Chapter 4:18. The snow-capped mountains protected the snow-white shattered ridge. The cries of dragons and eagles clashed in the blue sky, the lightning and dragon's breath splitting the sky. Huge birds of prey and legendary dragons, which were rarely seen on normal days, fell from the sky like dumplings. The Alterac people hid in their houses, trembling and praying for misfortune to stay away. In truth, it was very difficult. From the moment the battle was set on Alterac Mountain, a lot of destruction was unavoidable. Perhaps Xueqi could have stopped all of this, but Xueqi chose to give up. Alterac King Eden's two-faced viper nature was right there. Even if Xueqi could save him once, he wouldn't be able to save him a second or a third time.
Rather than letting Alterac Mountain become a ticking time bomb, it was better to clean it up in one go in the course of history that Xueqi was familiar with.
The Crimson Dragon was like a bulldozer as it fell diagonally. Before the momentum of its high-speed fall had dissipated, the small houses were smashed into smithereens, leaving a wide black scar on the snow-white ground. Even when the Crimson Dragon crashed into the city walls of the shattered ridge, the momentum did not dissipate. The thick city wall finally acted as a gatekeeper. The giant dragon did not smash through the city wall. Instead, it rolled under the fierce impact and fell down the cliff in one breath. Red scales and broken limbs flew like bullets, sweeping away all the soldiers on top of the wall. The Alterac people below screamed in fear, feeling as if the world had collapsed.
Other than a few people with good agility and balance, most people lost their footing and fell to the ground.
In the Alterac capital city, many Beastman elites took the opportunity to fight in close combat, using their powerful arm strength to easily tear apart the royal family's guards who were caught in their punches and kicks. Amidst the chaotic screams, the guards watched in despair as a green shadow pressed down on them. They instinctively raised their shields to block the charge of a rhinoceros, but all of them failed. Every single one of them failed. Their arms and shoulders were crushed by the tremendous force that surpassed their limits. They screamed as they were grabbed by the elite orc warriors, their helmets, heads, and necks torn from their bodies. Blood covered the ground. When the complete battle formation collapsed, the shadow of death was right in front of the guards. Even though the number of Orgrim's guards was only a tenth of the Wong clan's guards, every single one of them seemed to be on drugs. They charged into the crowd and started a massacre. In low-level battles, Orgrim's men had the upper hand. In terms of top-notch strength, the Alliance had the advantage since they were scheming against each other.
He was different from Lothar, who was in his 40s, burdened by military affairs, and whose strength had begun to decline. The title of the Alliance's god of war had fallen to Wother. The strongest holy knight, who was at the peak of his life, was showing Orgrim how he made his name on the Silver Pine Forest's western front. It was a beautiful strike supported by the powerful holy light. The golden holy light was like a god descending from the heavens. The golden holy light gathered at one point and smashed towards Orgrim's face. In this era, in the world of Azeroth and the Church of Holy Light, there were no more than 30 people who could condense holy light into a tangible hammer. Each of them had their own experiences, and to the ordinary warriors present, they were no less than living legends. If any of them were to be placed in the army, they would be a terrifying figure that could rival 1,000 men. As for Wother, he was an existence that stood at the pinnacle of these peerless experts. When Wother smashed his hammer, Xueqi didn't dare to take it, even if he had the ice barrier, which was known to have absolute defense. In the end, the so-called absolute defense was only relative. The ice barrier used the extremely dense ice element to forcefully remove all power outside of the ice. But what about the higher-level, more focused power of holy light? Even Xueqi, who had the title of God of Magic, didn't have the confidence to do so. However, Orgrim countered the attack with his own attack and managed to nullify it. His muscles bulged, and his inhuman strength was completely revealed at this moment. Orgrim was actually using his hammer to fight against his hammer. When the countless golden lines of holy light that cut through the dark shadows in the hall collided with the terrifying rising lava fire, the collision of the elements produced a huge explosive effect that dazzled everyone's eyes. Everyone only saw the golden and reddish-black flames explode like fireworks. It was as if two huge Persian chrysanthemums were fiercely colliding and grinding against each other. Countless petals scattered and withered, and then there was a deafening collision sound. After a full 3 seconds, the flames that flowed out from the two people finally disappeared. No one would have thought that Wother, who looked like a human, could actually fight like a wild beast. Orgrim frowned. The situation was not good for the tribe. Other than him, it seemed that only Rexer could faintly suppress that holy knight called Gavin Rad. The others were either in a stalemate, or were directly at a disadvantage. Kargath Bladefist seemed incomparably powerful, trading injury for injury with Saidan Dathrahan, but the problem was that he was a holy knight who had the ability to recover. If the fight continued and he really didn't run, the one who would die would definitely be Kargath. The Black Scar chief, Ka-God Derek, was even worse off. He was directly suppressed by Tyrion Fordring, and could not even trade injuries for much. On the other hand,
Kilrog Deadeye was evenly matched with the two female elven rangers. Kilrog was suppressing one of the rangers in close combat, but he was constantly annoyed by the ranger's shooting. If his blind eye couldn't provide him with a short period of foresight, then Kilrog might have already knelt down. Samuro wanted to chase after Duque, but he was held back by a female elven ranger. The problem was that the Alliance still had many high-end forces. Bolvar was on a killing spree. The limits of the human body determined that it was impossible for them to surpass the beastmen in terms of pure strength. But the power of holy light made up for the lack of destructive power, and humans could be faster. No one would have thought that Bolvar's attack speed would be so fast.
In reality, the leader of the Great Chief's guards could only see the golden light that suddenly appeared in his field of vision getting bigger and bigger. Then with a bang, his entire head turned into a cannonball and was sent flying by Bolvar from his tall and sturdy body. It pierced through one of the huge glass windows in the palace hall that was no less than 8 meters tall, and finally fell onto the lawn of the palace. When he saw the beastman's head fly out, a bloody eyeball popped out and hung on the top of King Eden's beloved glass window. Bolvar could not help but bare his teeth. The devout holy knight silently said in his heart, "Ugh, I can't see anything and I don't know anything."
Chapter 419. Bolvar, who was unable to retract his hammer in time, took advantage of the opportunity to launch a sneak attack on another of the chieftain's personal guards. A roundhouse elbow strike that most beast men would not have expected caused the fellow to grimace. Just as the other party was in pain, Bolvar grabbed the beastman's well-braided braid and pulled it down, ruthlessly destroying its center of gravity. In the next moment, his metal boot stomped heavily on the back of the beastman's neck, causing the ugly green-skinned beast's face to intimately touch the floor. Finally, his foot smashed his face into the marble floor below. The Holy Knight's skill. Divine consecration. The powerful power of the holy light passed through the beastman's body and into the floor, creating a circular area with a diameter of 5 meters around it, dealing holy damage to all creatures that were not protected by the holy light. Yep, it also blinded the beastmen and their own people.
Ah! The beastman beneath Bolvar's feet twitched a few times before unwillingly turning into a pile of charcoal.
A few brave beastmen pounced at Bolvar, but they were all hammered away by the Storm Duke. All that was missing was a domineering, who else? Bolvar could change the name of the golden holy light on his body to the aura of a bastard. Oh, that's not right. It should be the aura of a tyrant. Of course, Bolvar was a humble holy knight. How could he do something as superficial as Duque? Servanas was also having a good time killing. Aurelia and Lilith against Kilrog, Sasha against Samuro, leaving Servanas free. Compared to Bolvar, Queen Sylvanas was the true god of slaughter. In a situation where there were no opponents of the same level to restrain them, an agile hero could kill faster. A giant hammer smashed down, and Queen Sylvanas took half a step back, allowing the hammer to slash across her chest by a hair's breadth. In the next moment, she suddenly pounced forward, the tip of her foot tapping on the hammer's head and leaping upwards.
She was so fast that the beastman in front of her could only see a fleeting green shadow flash by. His throat and arteries had already been severed by the dagger.
Standing lightly on the corpse that had yet to fall, Queen Sylvanas surveyed her surroundings.
In front of her were 8 extremely strong beast men pouncing at her.
Outside, another 8 orc warriors were standing guard.
The sound of the axe and sledgehammer crashing through the air was enough to make the scalps of the nearby Alterac royal family's guards go numb.
Servanas chuckled softly.
In the eyes of the orcs, he was like a dark queen standing on a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood, laughing maniacally.
In the next instant, they saw the lightning of thunder. Boom!
With a cold face, Servanas reached her hands to the back of her waist, where 2 smaller quivers hung.
Inside were arrows with metal arrowheads that did not conform to the Windrunner tradition, and the shafts were even shorter. When Queen Sylvie raised her hands again and flicked her fingers outwards, 4 short arrows shot out from the gaps between her slender fingers. With her unique technique, each arrow was wrapped in electricity, forming a spiral arrow that kept spinning clockwise, piercing through the throats of 8 orcs. In the next instant, something miraculous happened.
Under the mysterious attraction of the lightning, all the short arrows flew to the bowstring that Queen Sylvanas had pulled back in mid-air. The short arrows shot out once again, following the trajectory of the electromagnetic trajectory in mid-air, hitting the orcs left front, right back, left back, a total of 8 unimaginable angles between the eyebrows of the orcs.
A miraculous area of effect skill. Obviously, no one would teach Sylvanas how to use her new lightning ability. She had figured it out on her own. Orgrim's eyes darted around.
Every battle situation was in his field of vision, and it was clear that the scales of victory were tipping in the Alliance's favor. After all, this was the capital of a human kingdom. Even if there were not many soldiers, the defense system was quite complete. There was no one to suppress the generals of Alterac. A few generals, including Haas, had freed up their hands to command the panicking troops and began to kill the orc soldiers more efficiently. Orgrim entered Alterac under the guise of an emissary. He could not bring too many people in anyway. 50 strong orcs was the bottom line that the Alterac people could accept. But now, these personal guard-level warriors were all killed by the Alliance's heroes in a few exchanges. Orgrim's heart was bleeding. The only one who had the upper hand was the Dragon Maw Dragon Knight. But he had a bad feeling, because he suddenly realized that the most important person in the Alliance, and also the person he was most afraid of, was not here. The King of Alterac was important, but it was not enough for the vice-commander of the Alliance, Xueqi, to be King Eden's bodyguard. Xueqi's absence could only mean that Xueqi was looking for a bigger victory. Orgrim had fought with Xueqi for so long. He was very clear about Xueqi's way of doing things. In the world of Azeroth, most kings, commanders, and generals had a clear and distinct sense of home. They would subconsciously defend their important cities or resource points. Xueqi's way of fighting was completely different from these people. Xueqi did not care about the gains and losses of a city or land. He cared more about killing and injuring the Horde.
Right. His goal was to wipe out the Horde. At the start, even Orgrim himself did not realize it, much less the previous chief. But slowly, Orgrim realized that the Horde's wounded were much less than he had imagined. Of course, the orcs were brave and fierce. More importantly, the orcs had good physiques. As long as they were not crippled, the orcs could survive for a week or two, and with enough food, they would recover. But the number of wounded was too little. The young orcs would become veterans even if they were injured. After a few battles, the veterans would naturally become elites. Xueqi's tactic of killing one person rather than 10 caused a gap in the growth of the Horde's warriors. The Horde could not train their soldiers, and they died quickly. Naturally, the number of elites decreased.
On the other hand, for some reason, large numbers of cowardly farmers, who used to be able to fight 100 Horde warriors, became elite soldiers. Ever since the start of the war, the exchange rate between the orcs and the humans had been decreasing. Orgrim shuddered at the thought of this.
Duke Marcus, what are you eyeing on this Horde?
Orgrim could not think of an answer, but he could see that the Horde was no longer in a good position.
Retreat! Orgrim roared. The heroes of the Horde immediately thought of ways to escape from the battle. Orgrim's order to retreat was slightly late.
After Xueqi had placed King Eden in the basement and was protected by a squadron of royal guards and 2 court mages, Xueqi arrived at the top of the castle.
He saw an unexpected person.
Ilusia, what are you doing here?
Xueqi was shocked. Chapter 420. In Xueqi's plan, Ilusia was not supposed to appear here. Ilusia's early return to her family to meet Duke Barov was actually to pave the way for Xueqi to meet with the Duke. Duke Barov was a family supremacist. If he was called over by King Eden and faced the situation directly, it was obvious that whether it was out of his friendship with Eden or consideration for his family's business, Xueqi estimated that there was a 90% chance that he would agree to join the alliance. In history, the Barov family had also boarded Eden's pirate ship and suffered terribly from Eden. When Alterac failed to suck up to the tribe's daddy, Eden fled to the Barov family's hometown, Caerdaro, and was surrounded by the alliance's troops. Duke Barov finally chose to hand Eden over. But after the war, the Barov family's territory was still confiscated, which led to the Barov family offering the entire Caerdaro to the Cursing sect during the Third Battle of the Dark Portal, causing the family's territory to become a scholomance where undead gathered. Since Xueqi knew about it, he would not let this tragedy happen. He easily convinced Duke Barov. It was simple.
If even the Alliance's deputy commander, Xueqi, knew about the so-called betrayal of the Alliance, then the so-called rebellion was simply a joke. Since it was an anti-human plan that was destined to fail, even if it was the king he was loyal to, Duke Barov had no reason to board Eden's sinking ship. The reason for supporting the Alliance was also very simple. I am a human first, then a subject loyal to the king. Just like that, Xueqi obtained the full support of Duke Barov and his wife,
and was able to use illusions to pretend to be Duke Barav and participate in Eden's betrayal. In Duque's plan, there was no need for Elucia to appear. But now, Elucia appeared on the rooftop under the protection of 4 strong private soldiers wearing the Barav family emblem. Not only Elucia, but there were also 2 Alterac court mages standing behind her. Duque glanced at the red dragon and griffins fighting in the sky and said nervously, "Elucia, it's dangerous here. I only told you to gather people to help set up the magic array. I didn't ask you to come. But I want to help you. Duque, you want to wipe out the red dragon army, don't you?" A strong gust of wind blew past, causing Elucia's beautiful black hair to flutter in the wind. Beneath her silver forehead ornament was a pair of beautiful, intelligent eyes. Being with Elucia had always made Duque feel comfortable. She was considerate and submissive, just like a little wife who would meekly endure whatever hardship she encountered. Not only that, but she had a good upbringing and excellent diplomatic skills, and she was also quite smart. However, Duke did not expect Elucia to be this smart.
Duque smiled. "As I expected."
"I've seen through you." Elucia raised her chin a little proudly. "Of course, what you wanted me to do was to set up a magic circle to enhance the power of ice and snow, and I immediately thought of it. So I asked my father to use his connections to give you a little surprise." The daughter of the Barav family turned around and introduced them to Duke. "These 2 are Alterac's court archmages Gasnerd and Chailt. They can give you control of the Alterac Palace's magic array." At this point, Elucia blinked. One of the magic circles in the Alterac Palace is flight restriction. Duque was stunned. To be honest, Duque was not sure if Orgrim would come. He just instinctively felt that Orgrim would not let go of the chance to control a human kingdom.
That was why he borrowed the power of Duke Barav, who was in power with Alterac, to bring in half of the Silverhand Knights and the Windrunner sisters.
The Silverhand only had about 100 elite paladins.
Half of the knights only had 70 people, which was not a problem for Duke Barav.
If Orgrim did not come, these people would be more than enough to suppress King Eden. If Orgrim came, the Horde would be in trouble. Since Orgrim liked to use dragoons as cover, Duque hoped to change the ratio of air forces between the 2 sides. The Griffin Knights of the Wildhammer Dwarves were strong, but they should be used in better ways than to fight the Red Dragons. So, Duque secretly asked Elucia to arrange a magic array at the top of the palace. But Duque only wanted to deal a heavy blow to the Red Dragon army, not wipe them out. He knew his own strength. It was too difficult to wipe out hundreds of red dragons with the power of a Morning Star wizard. Elucia had just told him that even Eden's most trusted court wizard was from the Barav family, and that he could control the magic array in the palace to set up a no-fly zone. Then there was hope. A wave of ecstasy welled up in Duque's heart. Duque was so excited that he could not control himself. He subconsciously hugged Elucia and patted her on the back.
"Ha ha ha.
That's great. That's great. I'll kill you lizards this time. Elucia, you've done a great job." At first, Elucia was dumbfounded. She had never thought that Duque would be so happy that he hugged her. The next moment, a faint blush appeared on her elegant face. She said lightly, "Ugh, as long as you're happy, Duque." "Of course I'm happy. All right, it's dangerous here. Go to a safe place quickly. I'm going to play big."
With that, the simple-minded Duque threw her aside and went to discuss some matters with the 2 court wizards. Elucia pursed her lips, her small hands gripping the hem of her wizard robe tightly before letting go.
Duque is a man who does big things. With that, she did not plan to pester Duque. After bidding farewell to Duque, she tactfully retreated. A few minutes after Duque sent a magical message, Kudrin, who was fighting in the sky, finally received Duque's message. "What? Are you kidding?" "Of course I'm not kidding. Please, you're playing with fire with the lives of all the Wildhammer Griffin Knights and Griffins in the Eagle Nest Mountain." Kudrin almost cursed out loud, losing speed and altitude in an aerial battle. "That's suicide. And falling from this height won't kill those lizards. Who told you that I want to fight a simple aerial battle? I don't agree. Unless you have a better reason to convince me." As he spoke, Kudrin controlled Scarlet to make a maneuver that was similar to Engerman's spin. While Scarlet was spinning, Kudrin used Stormhammer to send an orc flying into the air. "All right, I've told you, my trump card is..." Upon hearing that name, Kudrin's body trembled. "All right, you've convinced me. Chapter 421. Compared to the one-sided battle in the palace, the battle in the sky had reached its climax. Apart from Kudrin's initial ambush that successfully killed a group of red dragons, the rest were all bloody battles. The sky was filled with wild hammer dwarf griffin knights and red dragon knights. A few human griffin knights were only joining in the fray, surrounding and attacking the injured red dragons. Overall, it was still disadvantageous for the alliance. It was mainly due to the individual differences. Griffins were strong, but that was only in the eyes of humans and beast men. When facing the red dragons, the griffins were suppressed in almost every aspect: speed, strength, defense, and vitality. Only in terms of agility were the griffins slightly superior. Kudrin had been trying to make up for his lack of combat power with tactics, such as sending one griffin to lure the red dragons while the other two griffins attacked from the back, killing the dragon roar orcs first before dealing with the red dragons. Unfortunately, the overall situation was still precarious. However, with good coordination and cover, the injured griffins quickly retreated and managed to maintain the situation. Kudrin did not know how to win, and most of the wild hammer dwarves were only relying on their vitality to support themselves. Originally, Kudrin was not optimistic about Duque's plan, but since Duque had invited that person, he decided to trust him for the time being. "Duque! You bastard! If you join the Wild Hammer Griffin Legion and perish here today, I will find you and beat you to death even if you hide in the depths of hell." "Don't worry. Stay calm," Duque said in a magical message. "Damn it. I must be crazy." While muttering to himself, Kudrin kept his storm warhammer and held the reins with one hand while blowing the horn with the other. Woo, woo, woo. The distant and heroic sound of the horn attracted the attention of all the wild hammer dwarves. At this moment, the sun suddenly broke through the thick layers of clouds. As if responding to the call of the Wild Hammer King, the white wings of countless griffins shone with golden radiance under the sunlight. They quickly got rid of their opponents and began to gather at the center of the battlefield. But every Wild Hammer dwarf was dumbfounded. The next sound of the horn was, "Landing?" A short inquiry was sent to Kudrin. The reply was still land. The Wild Hammer dwarves were dumbfounded. If they landed now, wouldn't their backs be exposed to the red dragon? And it was so dense. If the red dragon came over and used its dragon breath, that would really be... Oh! Even if our king wants to roast our griffin friends, there's no need to do that, right? The Wild Hammer dwarves almost burst into tears. However, there was no other way. Sensing the gathering of the griffins, the red dragons had automatically ascended to a higher altitude. Then, they all descended to a lower altitude and began diving down towards the griffins. "Descend. If you don't want to die, come down to the lawn of the palace." Kudrin ordered the herald beside him to repeatedly sound the horn, while he waved his arms fiercely, ordering his men to land. "Whatever. If I die, I die." The Wild Hammer dwarves gnashed their teeth and cursed Kudrin. They cursed the ancestors of the bastard who came up with this idea and ordered the griffins to descend at high speed. Above their heads, the huge red dragon legion had also finished assembling. Nearly 300 dragons formed a terrifying dragon roar, forming a tsunami of sound that echoed in the clear sky. The dwarves turned their heads and saw the scene that covered the sky. As if they were under a spell, they were nailed to the backs of the griffins and could not move. Their eyes were filled with despair as they looked up at the sky. They were almost paralyzed. If it wasn't for the dwarves tying themselves to the back of the griffins to avoid being thrown down in the fierce aerial battle, perhaps the dwarves would have fallen like raindrops. A miracle happened. Almost at the moment when they descended to a height of 100 meters, every dwarf felt the change in the situation. They passed through a thin membrane that was almost invisible to the naked eye. It was freezing and cold. Almost every griffin and its knights shivered. This was a mage's ice barrier? They guessed right. Almost as soon as the last griffin passed through the shield, about 30 dragon breaths landed on the huge ice shield. When the blazing dragon's breath landed on the translucent ice barrier, a strange sizzling sound immediately rang out. It was a clash of heat and cold. The blazing flames evaporated the water on the barrier, and the cold counteracted the invasion of the heat. Amazing! Which breaking dawn great wizard had arrived? Or was this the magical defense system of the Alterac Palace? The dwarves who had already begun to descend handed the task to the griffins. They stared blankly at the hemispherical barrier that looked like a freshly peeled egg flickering under the bombardment of the dragon breaths,
as if it would collapse at any moment, as if the flames of death would descend upon them at any moment.
However, such a situation did not happen. It did not even deform. It only felt that the ice shards floating on the barrier were becoming denser. At this time, more than one wild hammer dwarf saw Xueqi standing at the highest point of the castle where the palace was located. The deputy commander of the alliance, the young man who had always been nicknamed the Miracle Man, was like a god descending to earth at this moment. Dozens of huge snowflakes were circling around him. Each hexagonal snowflake was as big as a basin, and they were circling around him in a specific trajectory. Thank you for your support, Kudrin. Leave the rest to me, Xueqi.
Xueqi shouted in an extremely pretentious manner. In the next second, Xueqi stretched out his 5 fingers with a cold expression.
A bluish-white magic rose from the soles of his feet, illuminating Xueqi's face. From the perspective of the Red Dragon cavalry, Xueqi was surrounded by a huge magic formation that was at least 30 meters in diameter. Zulu Hid, who was commanding in the air, had a drastic change in expression.
He shouted, "Not good.
Run. Don't you think it's too late to escape now?" Xueqi sneered. A huge storm quickly formed at Xueqi's feet and spread rapidly. In the blink of an eye, the diameter of the storm was more than 300 meters. The griffins screamed in fear, trembling under the shocking power of this magic. But soon, they realized that they were already standing in the eye of the tornado, the safest place. There was nothing happening here.
Instead, not far away, the icy wind that was as sharp as a knife was carrying pieces of ice crystals that were constantly spinning. With the swirling and the addition of a large amount of ice aura, these ice crystals quickly turned into huge round flakes, their sharp edges emitting a cold glint under the sun.
Run! Run! Zulu Hid, who was high up in the sky, ordered his subordinates to climb as fast as they could. But it was too late. A thick layer of frost had already formed on the surface of the dragon's wings. Although the dragons were not afraid of low temperatures, it was enough to reduce the frequency at which they flapped their wings, greatly reducing their climbing speed. In the next instant, the air seemed to have been sucked away. The giant dragon and its rider screamed in pain as they fell to the ground. What awaited them was a giant tornado of ice blades that kept spinning like a meat grinder. Chapter 422. Alterac Mountain was a very barren place. Apart from snow and rocks, there was almost nothing here. There were no specialties. Even if there were some mines, how could they dig in such terrible weather? Perhaps the snowmen here were the only specialties. Alterac didn't have griffins, but King Eden was afraid of griffins descending upon his castle. Thus, he set up a flight restriction magic circle on the castle. It wasn't entirely correct to say that it was a flight restriction. This magic circle mainly removed some of the wind element and increased gravity. Normally speaking, if Duke wanted to make a name for himself in a magic array like this, he would have to extract the wind elements and use them to form an ice storm to kill his enemies. This was a complete paradox. But Xueqi did it.
Under the gazes of the hundreds of wild hammer dwarves and the thousands of Alterac soldiers, everyone saw a huge ice tornado form under Xueqi's command.
It was a huge tornado more than 20 meters above the ground. It was so big that one couldn't see its end. It wrapped around the towering mountains surrounding Alterac City in all 4 directions. The scenery in the distance was already blurry. All that could be seen were faint shadows rising and falling, as well as the faintly discernible mountain range. Apart from the contours of the world, all the landscape was destroyed by the huge spinning ice chunks. The giant dragon falling from the sky let out a powerful roar, but the roar that was full of vigor had long since been drowned out by the howling of the wind, turning into a muffled groan. The giant dragon was sucked into the tornado, its scarlet body quickly blurring and turning into a dark shadow. Just looking at the high-speed spinning made one dizzy, not to mention the terror of being caught in it. Bam! A huge bloody figure was embedded into the mountain to the north of Alterac City. Everyone focused and realized that it was the corpse of a young red dragon with almost all its scales peeled off. Its flesh was a bloody mess, and its body was covered in ice. Bam! There was another explosion, and a smaller red dragon fell to the ground a little outside the city wall. After falling to the ground, it also lost all sound and movement. Just like that, the red dragons that had landed with great momentum died tragically one after another in the outskirts of the city. No one dared to make a sound. They looked in awe at Xueqi, who was casting the spell at the top of King City. From time to time, he would look at the huge tornado with a diameter of several kilometers. It looked like the storm was boundless. It was like a black hole that swallowed everything, pulling in everything in the sky and stirring it up. Alterac City was like a garbage dump below, but it was also like an isolated island in the middle of a storm. It was so small, which was why the storm was so wide and so powerful. The ferocious griffin was like a docile kitten, crawling on the ground, shivering. The Griffin Knights who had been through hundreds of battles took off their helmets and paid their utmost respect to the powerful mage who stood at the top of the castle. Everyone seemed to be standing on this safe island, quietly watching the performance of the apocalypse storm. Everyone had lost the ability to speak, silently watching everything. Those who were not familiar with Xueqi had the deepest respect for Xueqi. Those who were familiar with Xueqi were puzzled. Wasn't Xueqi just a morning star wizard? Even if he had the support of a magic formation, could he do something so ridiculous? In fact, Elucia, who was one floor down from the top floor, smiled wryly at the pair of clowns in front of her. Xueqi, you bastard, are you done yet? This old man can't hold on much longer. At the bottom of the staircase beside Xueqi's feet, an old man with a white beard and a white beard, dressed in magnificent epic equipment that blinded all wizards, was cursing loudly. Just a little bit more. I'll be done after dealing with these 5. Xueqi seemed to be chanting, but he was actually replying. Bah! Just materials for 5 red dragons. This old man looks down on you. The white-bearded old wizard continued to curse, but at least he had some humanity and did not stop immediately. However, the light of the magic circuits that appeared on his body was gradually dimming. Tisk, it's not that I'm the scapegoat, but when you see the materials for a red dragon, a dog, pouncing on it like it's biting a bone. Xueqi had wanted to say that the dog ate Ch*T, but he changed his words. Bastard! You still dare to anger me? Do you believe that I won't take a few more and leave? The white-haired old man continued to curse. Do you believe that when Alexstrasza comes after me in the future, I'll give you up first? I'll kill you first. All right, come. Xueqi smiled evilly, looking like a dead pig that was not afraid of boiling water. The old man did not utter a word. Elucia could not help but let out a puffed. Humph, humph. The two of them ignored each other. Who was this old man? Naturally, he was the Dalajan's greatest, most powerful, and most magnificent chairman, Antonidas. After gaining control of the magic formation, the first thing that Xueqi thought about was how to maximize the results of the battle. Since he wanted to keep the entire Red Dragon Legion here, he alone could not do it. So he used a magic message and dragged Antonidas into the water. Dragons were fierce, but every part of a dragon's body was a treasure. Dragon scales could be made into armor, dragon tendons could be made into powerful siege weapons, dragon skin could be made into magic materials, dragon blood could be made into magic potions. The problem was that not many people in this world dared to slay dragons. That was because the dragon race was a clan, a nest. When the young were killed, the big ones came, and when the big ones were killed, the old ones came. The older they were, the more powerful they were. This was especially true for a large family like the Red Dragons, which had thousands of members. If the Red Dragons went all out, they had the power to flatten a country. So most adventurers and mages could only stare at the treasures the dragons had on them. For thousands of years, they had been waiting for a traitor to appear in the Dragon Clan. Well, actually there were a few traitors such as the Black Dragon Clan. However, the Black Dragon Clan was extremely arrogant, and they appeared and disappeared mysteriously. Who could catch them? This time, Xueqi directly proposed to Antonidas that he would slay a large number of dragons in his own name and split the profits with Antonidas. Antonidas could not refuse this temptation at all. Rumor had it that the Red Dragon Queen was being controlled, causing the Red Dragons to join the horde against the alliance. Who knew if Alexstrasza would come after him after she got out of trouble? Now that Xueqi had sworn that he would take care of the Red Dragon Queen, Antonidas's thoughts became active. In the end, he could not resist the temptation and was dragged down by Xueqi. The world only saw Xueqi's arrogance and dominance. Who would know that Antonidas, one of the only 2 Breaking Dawn mages in the world, was at Xueqi's feet helping him? Moreover, even their magic circuits were the same version. Chapter 423. The advantage of being a transmigrator was on full display at this moment. Knowing that Eden wasn't kind, Duque was able to stop the situation from worsening and turn defeat into victory. Knowing Alexstrasza's true situation, Duque wasn't afraid of the Red Dragon Queen's revenge. Having so many of the dragon race's descendants killed was a very sad thing. But being controlled by Demon's soul for a lifetime, being tortured by the crippled beastman Necros every day without being able to resist, and having to send the red dragons to their deaths, this was the true tragedy. As long as Duque broke Demon's soul's control over Alexstrasza, the Red Dragon Queen wouldn't be able to thank him enough. Why would she vent her anger on him for slaughtering her descendants? Thus, Antonidas's fear was completely unfounded. Because of an unlikely event, he felt that he owed Duque a huge favor. Antonidas was also a model of taking advantage of others. Oh, that wasn't entirely true. At the very least, the Red Dragon's scales and skin had earned him quite a bit. Of course, this didn't stop Duque from showing off. At the edge of Alterac City, Horde Chief Orgrim and his old comrades watched this scene in shock.
Duke, who was standing on top of the city, was like a god, waving his arms, summoning gales and blades of ice, wantonly splitting the sky, causing the giant dragons in the sky to scream and fall to the mortal world.
Not a single dragon could escape the terrifying storm. Not a single dragon had the ability to pass through the storm and give Duque the slightest blow. These overlords of the sky that usually soared in the sky were now no better than pigs in a slaughterhouse, being slaughtered one-sidedly. Orgrim guessed that this was the work of the humans' magic arrays. As a warrior, his knowledge of mysticism was still lacking. However, that sense of crisis and that sense of urgency made Orgrim's mind frantically ring the alarm bells. Seeing the battered and exhausted Zulu Cid flying over on his last dragon, Orgrim couldn't help but roar, "Is there any news of Gul'dan? The tribe needs his evil power right now." Zulud gritted his teeth and lowered his head. "I've already sent a messenger, but there's no reply." "Then send more messengers. 2 riders to a group, 3 riders to a group. If that doesn't work, then you can go yourself." Orgrim was fuming. He was a little confused. Could it be that every capital city in this world had such a powerful magic defense system? Stormwind City burned down 100,000 orcs. As soon as Quel Salus entered the country, he had to rely on Gul'dan to break through the magic defense system. Even Alterac, the weakest of the 7 human kingdoms, had a magic formation that could annihilate hundreds of dragons. Wouldn't the magic defense of Lordaeron, the strongest human kingdom, be? Orgrim didn't dare to imagine it. Even after sending Zulu Hid away, Orgrim was still in a bad mood. He could not help but mutter, "Does every kingdom have this many defensive magic circles?" "That doesn't seem to be the case, Great Chief." A voice that Orgrim didn't recognize sounded. The Great Chief turned around and saw an unfamiliar face. It was a sword saint of the Fireblade clan. This young sword saint seemed to be here to report on a mission. The only thing that Orgrim was curious about was that the sword saint was carrying a human in each hand. Sensing the Great Chief's suspicious gaze, the sword saint immediately explained in the orc language, "Just now, I used Bladestorm to kill a lot of human nobles, but these 2 young humans with the Duke's insignia have magical defensive devices on their bodies and escaped death. I think they are very important human nobles." Able to block a sword saint's Bladestorm? There weren't many of such devices, and even if there were, they were very expensive. Orgrim remembered that Samuro had said that he almost killed the king of Stormwind, and that the king did not have such anti-weapon devices. Most beast men were uncouth, and only a few Great Chief were willing to learn the common language and human knowledge. However, the Fireblade Sword Saint, who was the strongest assassin and scout of the beast men, was definitely an exception. Mastering the enemy's language and knowing who was the most valuable target was definitely a necessary lesson for an assassin. Orgrim didn't care about the others, but before he used the spell, he had carefully told the Sword Saints about Alterac's noble insignia. Just like the Sword Saint, Orgrim could tell just by looking at the badges of these 2 young humans. Bear of family? 2 dukes? Brand new duke insignia? Let's get back to what you were talking about, Sword Saint. As Orgrim spoke in orc language, he flashed a sinister smile at the 2 young humans who were panicking. The 2 of them were so scared that they peed their pants. There were obvious water stains on their crotches. The Sword Saint didn't care at all and replied in orc language, "I just casually asked them, and they swore that Alterac definitely doesn't have such a terrifying magic defense." Orgrim was overjoyed. He turned to the 2 of them and spoke in human language. "I am the Great Chief of the Horde, Orgrim Doomhammer. The Horde's plan failed tonight, and I am very unhappy. Between the two of you, I'm only going to keep the most valuable one.
The useless one will be the ogre's dinner.
He purposely grinned, letting his sharp, crisscrossed fangs dangle in front of the two similar-looking fellows. In fact, to the two of them, he looked more like an ogre. I'll talk. I'll tell you everything I know. Don't eat me.
The older one looked like he was about to cry.
No. Listen to me, that useless Wilden doesn't know anything.
Don't listen to Alex.
Orgrim was annoyed.
He roared and pointed at one of them. Shut up.
I'll ask you answer. Orgrim asked as he led the dispirited chieftains.
But as he asked, Orgrim's eyes lit up.
Ha 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 ha. The entire mountain path echoed with Orgrim's wild laughter.
He patted Kilrogg Deadeye's shoulder. We found a treasure.
Today is actually the Horde's lucky day. Orgrim didn't expect that what he couldn't accomplish with so many powerful chiefs would be accomplished by the two kids that were captured by the Sword Saint. These two young men weren't just any Tom, Dick, or Harry. They were the two precious sons of Duke Barov, Wilden Barov and Alex Barov. Chapter 424. As representatives of useless nobles with bloodline but no abilities, these two brothers could be said to have displayed their cowardice to the extreme. Historically, these two had always been at odds with each other. Even after their families were destroyed, they still wanted to kill each other. Even after they went to Draenor to open a lumber company, these two hated each other so much that they could not wait for each other to be destroyed so that they could take everything. History took a beautiful turn because of Duque. Duque never thought that these two brothers, who he thought were not worth his attention, would become the deciding factor in the war between the Alliance and the Horde. It was fine if these two brothers had no morals, but the key thing was that they knew a lot. From the geography of each country to their strength and military supplies, they actually knew everything. As the next generation of the Barov family, they were not young anymore. Duke Barov even trained them early and let them deal with family affairs. Alterac was the weakest country. Since they could not send too many soldiers, the Barov family mostly provided food and logistics to the countries of the Alliance to fulfill their obligations as members of the Alliance. Therefore, these two brothers actually knew most of the Alliance's military deployment and the situation around Lordaeron Mill Lake. After all, the three countries around Lordaeron Mill Lake were Lordaeron on the north coast, Dalagen on the south coast, and Alterac in the southeast. My information is absolutely accurate. I go to Lordaeron every year. Wilden shouted, trying to take credit. No. My internal information is correct. Alterac does not have such a strong magic defense system. Alex argued. Ha. There is nothing to argue about. Orgrim laughed and hugged the two brothers affectionately. He made a grand promise. As long as your information helps the Horde take down Alterac and Lordaeron, you will be the heroes of the Horde. Then you will be the heroes of the tribe, and you will receive the treatment of a tribal chief. I will also make one of you the king of the humans in the south and the other the king of the humans in the north. Really? Thank you, Chief. I will do my best. The two were so touched that they were about to cry. They did not even notice the strong smell of urine in their pants. The two were ambitious but brainless. They did not know that Orgrim's promise was a trap. He had to take it down first. Secondly, if all the humans on the continent were killed by the tribe, then what was the use of being the so-called king? Kilrogg glanced at the two traitors and asked in the Beastman language, Are you really going to let them be kings? Orgrim smiled. Why not? They had lost too many orc laborers. Someone has to make up for it. After the situation in Alterac calmed down, King Eden walked out of the basement under the protection of his guards. The tragic scene in front of him made him want to cry, but no tears came out. Dead. All dead. The hardcore nobles who supported him had all been turned into minced meat. Eden vomited at a glance. In his eyes, the incomparably beautiful and holy royal city was now in a state of devastation. There were destroyed houses everywhere, and the corpses of dragons and griffins that had fallen to the ground. When the orc chieftain broke out of the encirclement, there were only less than 10 of them, but they were chased and intercepted by half of the Silverhand Knights, 4 elven rangers, and over 1,000 soldiers. Eden could not imagine how Orgrim would deal with him and his kingdom. Just the thought of Orgrim's ferocious fangs made Eden's legs tremble. Unfortunately, he could not turn back. Duque's appearance had blocked his last hope of turning to the tribe. Your Majesty, please restrain your grief. But the most important thing now is to evacuate the people.
Since the main force of the tribe is not far from here, King Alterac will not be able to defend. Duque spoke as if it was a trivial matter. Wather and the others beside Duque also looked at Eden and his guards with disgust.
Duke did not bother with Aiden. Although he was the Alliance's vice-commander, he was still not qualified to judge a king. That was something that could only be done after the other kings voted. Hoss, please come here. We need to discuss how to fight this battle. Yes. General Hoss's expression was complicated. The king he served was finished.
As a human general, he had to carry out his duty for the survival of the human race. He knew that from this moment on, he and his soldiers would have to listen to this ridiculously young commander.
Duque did not avoid this and brought Hoss and Wather to Alterac's command center. Duke pointed at the shattered ridge where Alterac City was located. Traps are useless. Orgrim is not an idiot. I've already tricked him with magic traps twice, but I won't do it a third time. Moreover, the broken ridge is too small to defend against too many elites of the Horde. Orgrim won't send too many troops either, so what we need to do is to kill enough of the Horde and then retreat. On the other side, Duke Barov stood at the top of the castle, staring blankly at the mountains in the distance. Today was destined to be Alterac's day of suffering. Alterac did not turn to the tribe, but it was destined to suffer the flames of war. No matter what, King Eden would be nailed to the pillar of shame. Perhaps he would not be able to make a comeback for the next few centuries. The Barov family would not have it easy either. He had thought that with Duque's reminder, the Barov family would be able to jump out of the sinking ship that was Alterac. Duke Barov had thought of many possibilities, such as the Barov family completely breaking away from Alterac and turning to Stormwind, who actually controlled the Hillsbrad Hills. In any case, Hillsbrad was the Barov family's fief. It was just that the ruler had changed in name. Even if King Lang had to bear the shame of losing his capital, it would still be 1,000,000 times better than Eden, who had become a traitor. But now, everything was over.
Because of the betrayal of the two unfilial sons, the only two successors of the Barov family were on the wrong boat.
The Barov family could not avoid being nailed to the pillar of shame. Worst of all, an eyewitness told Duke Barov that his two sons had been kidnapped by the tribe Sword Saint. Alex Barov trembled all over. He knew his son's character too well. What if, just as he was about to collapse, King Eden walked over? Alex, is this the ending you wanted? You and I are finished. Our family is finished. Not only did we not get anything, we have to give up everything.
Eden waved his arms in agitation.
Duke Barov was speechless. He looked at his childhood friend in a daze, his gaze unfocused.
Just as the Duke was about to say something, the two guards beside Eden suddenly flew out.
Chapter 425. Duke Barov also had guards behind him.
Unfortunately, the two unlucky fellows had just seen their companions suffer, and were wondering if they had been hit by an invisible dragon when they were struck by it.
Two long, sharp knives pierced their necks from behind. Sword Saint. Another Sword Saint of the Orcs. No one had expected that the Beastman Sword Saint would actually return so quickly. Duke Barov and King Piranha did not expect it, and neither did Duque. At this moment, all the elites in the Broken Ridge were gathered around Duque for a battle conference.
King Eden looked at the blood splattering in front of him, and was scared out of his wits.
He tried to dodge, but a huge green figure quickly materialized from a blur, cutting off all his hopes. In the next second, a scorching and powerful green arm already gripped his neck, lifting his entire body up. Don't kill me.
I'm the Great Chief's loyal servant. Eden's feet left the ground, and he shouted with difficulty.
The Great Chief doesn't need a lowly subordinate like you.
Remember, my name is Samuro.
The holy swordsman of the Horde proudly announced his name in the common tongue. He then beheaded the king of Alterac, one of the 7 human kingdoms of the Lordaeron Alliance, Aiden Piranid. At this moment, time seemed to have frozen. There were more than 30 people around who witnessed this scene, and everyone's face was filled with fear.
Looking at the head that was spinning in the air and flying high into the sky, looking at the head that was wearing the supreme golden crown on its forehead, everyone forgot to breathe. After their lungs exhaled the hot air, they could no longer inhale any fresh air. This was the head of a king. Before the head could fly for half a meter,
It was grabbed by Samuro's left hand.
Then, Samuro looked at Duke Barov with a gaze that symbolized the god of death, and his huge fangs glinted in the sunlight.
Duke Barov, your 2 sons asked me to send their regards to you. You're better off dead. As long as you're alive, they won't be able to become the legitimate heir of the Barov family. Samuro's clear common language made Duke Barov feel as if he had fallen into an abyss. Although he had long since anticipated that things would develop in a bad direction, he had never imagined that his 2 sons, who were worse than beasts, would not only learn from Eden and betray the humans, but also be so heartless as to ask the tribe's sword saint to take his life. His breathing had stopped, and his heart had forgotten to beat. At this moment, Duke Barov had already accepted his fate. 2 streams of tears rolled down his wrinkled face. Who would have thought that his illustrious reputation would be ruined in the hands of his 2 scum sons? Perhaps this was the result of him being too busy with his career and not disciplining his children. Just when everyone was in despair, a dazzling flash of light suddenly appeared between Duke Barov and Samuro's falling long sword. Dang! In Samuro's eyes, the dark blue ice barrier was like a huge block of ice that had suddenly appeared. This solid block of ice mercilessly rejected Samuro's attempts to raise his martial merit further. Duke had arrived. Using his powerful spatial sense and positioning ability, he flashed 3 times consecutively and ran from the command room to the roof. He had blocked this crucial attack. Samuro's sharp pupils constricted at lightning speed. Duke Marcus. Even though his entire body was sealed in ice, and even though he seemed to have used his last trump card, as the most feared enemy of the entire tribe, he seemed to have an endless supply of trump cards. Samuro believed that he could firmly suppress a Morning Star wizard who had used his trump card, but killing him would consume too many skills and waste too much time. His target was King Eden. As a sword saint with high attack and low defense, his use was reflected in concealment and surprise attacks. Without concealment and having lost the initiative, how could a sword saint go head-on against a powerful wizard with an infinite number of control techniques? Samuro did not hesitate to pull away and dodge. It was not just him. All the sword saints of the tribe did the same. Even though Duque quickly cancelled the ice barrier, he could not stop the high-speed sword saint from jumping onto the roof of a tall building beside the castle. When Duque flashed over again and prepared to use the system elf's powerful scanning ability to find and kill Samuro who had entered the Gale Step state, another sword saint appeared beside Duke Barov. Duque had no choice but to flash back again. That sword saint had been killed by Duque in an instant, but Duque had completely lost sight of Samuro. 30 minutes later, in the tribe's temporary camp, Orgrim let out the loudest and most heartfelt laughter since he had landed on Lordaeron. Ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha. The head of a human king. Ha ha ha. The head of King Eden, who had died with grievances, was Samuro's most outstanding achievement. The golden crown on Eden's forehead told every orc chief of the night's harvest. Samuro, you're the chief meritorious service today. I'll allow you to carry this head around the entire camp. Thank you, chief. Samuro's eyes were filled with ecstasy. This was the highest honor a horde warrior could receive. Orgrim punched the Alterac Kingdom's capital on the map. Today is the day of victory for the horde. We are going to destroy the capital of the Alliance. The entire horde camp was in an uproar. The head of a king. This was the first time they had obtained the head of a despicable human king since the start of the war. Every horde warrior raised the weapons in their hands and let out a loud roar, releasing the grievances they had been suppressing for a long time. Yes, this was the glory of the horde. This was the orcs' military achievement. Orgrim walked up to the high platform of the camp and took Eden's head from Samuro's long sword. He raised it up high, and a tsunami of cheers erupted from below. Today is the day of victory for the horde. We will use the head of a human king and the destruction of a human kingdom to tell all living beings on this continent that going against the horde is destined to fail. It will definitely be destroyed. Today is the day of glory for the horde warriors. Let us take this victory with our own hands. Loktar! Loktar! 50,000 voices rang out in unison. The horde moved out with unparalleled killing intent. With a thirst for victory. A thirst for fresh blood. The thunderous footsteps could be heard even from a few kilometers away. Duque, who was overseeing the broken ridge, had a blank look in his eyes. His face was green. After thinking for a long time, Duque let out a long sigh and waved his hand. Pass down my order. Everyone retreat immediately. Why?
General Hoss's neck was red.
Because Eden is dead, the Horde's morale is at its peak.
But because our king is dead, the soldiers desire revenge for his majesty.
Hoss's eyes were bloodshot. I have a message for you and your soldiers.
What is it?
Keep the land but lose the people. Keep the people, but lose the land, but recover. Xueqi said something that the people of Azeroth could not understand. On this day, the capital of the Alterac kingdom fell. Chapter 426. The Alterac kingdom was destroyed. Orgrim was smart enough to control the number of orcs that attacked. 3,000 people. Half of them elites and half of them soldiers. More than 2,000 of them were orcs. Many of them were trolls, and dozens of ogres. This was a number that tested Xueqi's mental fortitude. Xueqi had been using a high ratio of casualties, and Orgrim had noticed this.
That was why Orgrim attacked with a force that was close to teasing Xueqi.
Alterac's mountainous terrain was a natural barrier for humans, but not for the Horde.
Xueqi only sent the Silverhand Knights and the Windrunner sisters to guard the rear, and did not defend to the death.
Reality proved that Xueqi's decision was right. General Hoss, who was not far from Xueqi, saw many trolls with white and blue skin climbing up the cliffs around the broken ridge. They were throwing spears at the Holy Knights from above. They are Frostmane trolls, a branch of the Frost trolls. They have been active in the Bronzebeard dwarves Dan Molar.
Now they seem to have been recruited by the Horde, Xueqi said calmly.
He could almost imagine that if they defended to the death, the Holy Knights might be able to hold on, but the normal human warriors would definitely collapse under such a three-dimensional attack. Alterac did not have the protection of snow in the summer. After the Silverhand Paladins retreated, the entire capital city was set ablaze. The warriors of the tribe roared loudly and wantonly celebrated the destruction and conquest.
Humph.
Xueqi's face twitched as he snorted coldly. He saw the orcs pulling out large amounts of frozen meat and other rations from the cellar. In the cold Alterac, there was frozen soil 2 meters below the ground. It was the best place to make an ice cellar. Most of the Horde were people who did not mind meat. This batch of meat would obviously be a strong support for the Horde in attacking Lordaeron. Xueqi could not help but sigh. Orgrim had succeeded in the end. Although the situation was not as bad as the original history, it was not much better. In the original timeline, the second battle of the Dark Portal had completely changed the fate of the Alterac kingdom and the Bear of family. The treacherous King Eden surrendered to the Orc army and launched a counterattack against the Alliance army. They incited peasant riots in the areas controlled by the Alliance. The rebels repeatedly harassed the Dalajan troops around Hillsbrad, preventing them from supporting the Alliance forces fighting on other fronts. Very soon, the actions of the Alterac kingdom incurred the wrath of the Dalajan mages. The Dalajan swiftly and decisively dispatched an army to completely destroy the Alterac kingdom and raze it to the ground. This was the Alterac ruins in the future.
10 minutes later, Xueqi saw the Knights of the Silver Hand, who did not have many scars, and the Windrunner sisters, who were covered in sweat.
Wuther seemed a little dissatisfied. Deputy Commander-in-Chief, why did you send out the retreat signal so early? We can still kill more tribes.
In Xueqi's eyes, Uther was not a qualified commander.
His leadership was limited, and he did not see the big picture well enough. He was like the most perfect saint, spurring everyone to move forward with almost strict faith. Uther was indeed the most perfect flag, but not everyone was willing to live a more puritanical life than a Puritan.
Most of the time, Xueqi only used Uther as a fierce general.
Xueqi smiled faintly. This is not a good place for a decisive battle. If you were somewhere else, you could kill 100 Horde warriors in an hour. Here you can only kill 40. Save your strength, there is still war to fight. Pack up. We will immediately set off for Lordaeron. If we don't leave now, the tribes will reach your home before us. Not only Uther, but Saidan and Theon, the paladins from Lordaeron, also raised their eyebrows.
Ignoring the paladins, Xueqi turned to General Hoss and said, "Bring the Eagle Knights and all the infantry you can muster and follow me."
Hoss was stunned. He turned to look at the Alterac refugees in the distance. What about the Alterac citizens? Leave them to the local garrison. What if the Horde attacks them? Hoss and the other Alterac generals were anxious. Xueqi's eyes sharpened.
His sharp gaze reminded Hoss of the eagles that were flying over the snowy mountains, about to pounce on the prey.
I've been fighting with Orgrim for so long. Do you think I don't know what he's planning?
Believe me, before Orgrim split up to attack the Broken Ridge, he had already led the majority of his troops to Lordaeron.
Who knows, they might arrive even faster than we thought. Elusia's eyes were red as she silently stood behind Duque. She knew what Duque meant.
Her two goddamn brothers were leading the way for the Horde.
With them leading the way, the main force of the Horde would pass through the Alterac Mountains at a terrifying speed. Duque had guessed correctly.
Other than the 5,000 soldiers that Orgrim had sent to the rear, the rest of the main force had begun their rapid march in the afternoon.
Just as the Berev brothers had said, the Alterac army had given up on these roads. Even if there were a few bunkers on the road, the Berev brothers would shout at them with the contract they got from King Eden, and the soldiers in the bunkers would quickly retreat. This was an era where information was scarce. Other than the commanders of the Alliance, the king, and the generals, no one had the right to receive magical messages. Most of the messages were delivered by horse. The subordinates of the lesser nobles did not know that their lord was dead, but after seeing his signature and seal, they quickly retreated from the bunkers. Orgrim was able to quickly lead his soldiers through these narrow checkpoints. He thought that the Berev brothers would be of some use, and he was pleased to find out that his thinking was correct. The road ahead was still very dangerous. The orcs and trolls did not mind climbing the mountains, but the ogres were much more troublesome. Without Gujar, their movements were much slower. For a stone path like this, as long as there were a few soldiers blocking the way, once the corpses piled up, the ogres would not be able to pass through. Orgrim was not willing to give up on the ogres, especially the twin-headed ogre warriors. So he urged his army to quickly advance. He knew that once his army passed through the mountains, no one would be able to stop the Horde's giant axe from cutting into the heart of the Alliance. Once he succeeded, Grom Hellscream, who was trapped in the Silverpine Forest, would be freed. Based on his understanding of humans, most of them would rather give up a large piece of land in order to gather all their forces to protect their capital. Chapter 427. The main force of the Horde spent 2 days traversing the snow-covered mountains, descending west to the hilly region. Until now, the beast men had not seen a single human. Some of the warriors even grumbled that they had lost the chance to kill. However, the conquerors of the Alterac kingdom caught up from behind and triggered their nerves. Their great chieftain assured them that they would soon have that opportunity. Yes, they would have the chance. 3 days ago, when news of Alterac's destruction spread, Lordaeron, and even the entire Alliance, had a heated argument. In the command tent of Lordaeron's front line between Silverpine Forest and Tirisful Glades, a noble general roared like a madman, "That kid in the vice-commander's seat is an idiot. We gave him 50,000 troops, but he still let the Horde get under our noses." Mograine, who knew Duque the best, mocked him with clear disdain. "If you lead the army, you'll only give 50,000 to those barbaric green monsters. Retreat. Fail. Lose the capital. This is the second in the Alliance to lose the capital. Who's next? Lordaeron? Ironforge or Riptide Keep? Are we competing to see who will fall faster? No, we must keep the initiative in the hands of the people of Lordaeron. Your Majesty, you should use your influence to take back the position of commander and vice-commander." Another duke jumped out and slammed the table, attracting everyone's attention. His suggestion was immediately echoed by many nobles. Bang, bang, bang. He slammed the table, and Mograine did the same. As one of the few nobles who was extremely powerful, Mograine was not inferior to anyone in terms of making noise. "Watch your mouth, Duke Shade. Changing the commander will only cause more chaos." Mograine's exposed muscles bulged, his veins bulging. "The 2 commanders you speak of have done a good job. Under their leadership, we killed 500,000 beast men. The only reason for this is that there are too many damned greenskins. The one called Santos did not give up. If His Majesty Menethil leads us, we can kill 1,000,000 orcs." Admittedly, this was a very skillful bootlicker. If it was any other time, King Terenas would have accepted it with a smile. Unfortunately, this was a time when they needed the help of the allies the most. The King of Lordaeron, who was sitting on the highest seat, said calmly, "If I were the commander, there would be no alliance." The nobles immediately shut up. The white-haired King Terenas rubbed his temples and turned to look at his best commander,
High Lord Mograine.
What is your opinion? My Mograine. We can only retreat. The best soldiers of Lordaeron have been transferred here. The remaining city guards can't possibly deal with the core elites of the Horde.
If the combat power of this horde is as terrifying as Deputy Commander-in-Chief Marcus described, a few of the nobles stood up like cats whose tails had been stepped on. However, Terenas raised his hand and gestured for them to keep quiet, and they could only hold it in.
We don't have enough soldiers to fight on two fronts, so my answer is, yes. Ignoring the murderous gazes of the nobles whose fiefs were in the Tirisful woodlands, Mograine gritted his teeth. We don't have enough troops to fight on two fronts, so my answer is, yes. My Majesty. We cannot afford to lose Lordaeron. Everyone knew this, but it was a different story when it came to the Horde. Everyone knew that the Horde was a swarm of locusts that would consume all the resources wherever they went. The Horde was a nomadic people, and they had no concept of sustainable development. They hunted all the beasts in the forest and cut down all the trees. When they had no other choice, they would let the laborers feed the animals with plants. For example, the pigs captured from the humans were very much to the beastmen's liking. After fighting in the Silverpine forest for so long, they had almost destroyed the entire forest. It was summer, and it was difficult to find a tree with green leaves. Once they retreated, the Silverpine forest would become the template for the future Tirisful woodland.
Now that they saw the bitter faces of the Tirisful woodland lords, the lords of Silverpine Forest who had suffered for a long time felt like gloating over their misfortune.
However, retreating to Lordaeron was also a painful choice. After being surrounded by the Horde from both east and west, Lordaeron would lose all contact with their own territory. If they wanted to get supplies, they could only rely on Lake Lordaeron. To the east of the lake was a mountain, to the west was the destroyed Silverpine Forest, and to the south was the Dalagen. The Dalagen had never been known for their food production. What was particularly ironic was that the grain production area controlled by the refugees from the Stormwind Kingdom in Hillsbrad had become the backbone of the Alliance's food supply a year later. Alright, next topic. Since we've decided to retreat, how do we do it? The Horde in the Silverpine Forest had obviously received the news, and their attacks had become more frequent in the past 2 days. If we retreat now, we'll all be wiped out if the Horde catches up to us, Mograine warned solemnly. In principle, we have to leave some troops behind to cover our retreat. Hearing this, many lords' facial muscles twitched, and they lowered their heads. Some even took small steps back, afraid that their king would take a liking to them. Terena's expression did not look good. He waved his hand, and a servant immediately handed Mograine a note. I'm not very familiar with military matters. This is an idea that Xueqi gave me using magic. What do you think? Mograine's eyes lit up when he saw it. He said excitedly, he really is a military genius. Grom Hellscream personally led the army to attack the northern defense line of the Silverpine Forest. As a pure warrior, he did not know much about strategy. Since Orgrim had sent him a letter to lead the army to the north, he continued to send small groups of troops to attack. The humans' performance when they had a solid base was much worse than when they were fighting in the wild. If these guys were allowed to return to Lordaeron, it would definitely increase the difficulty of the attack by a few levels. For the past few days, there had been continuous drumming in the north, as if telling the Horde that they were on guard. In reality, as soon as the Horde's troops got close, the drumming would become more intense, and according to the scale of the Horde's attack, more human troops would pour out from the camp. The annoying paladins disappeared for 2 days, and then returned. The Silver Paladins even personally killed small groups of troops. This situation lasted for 3 days, and then Grom suddenly realized that something was wrong. Oh no! The humans are escaping. Chapter 428. The hanging sheep beating the drum was a trick used by the ancestors of Huaxia. It was definitely something new for the tribes.
When Grom led his army towards the Lordaeron camp that had at least 100,000 people, he only saw less than 1,000 cavalrymen and dozens of paladins torturing his small army.
Go! Go! On the plains, those with 2 legs could never outrun those with 4 legs. No matter how much Grom stared, he could only watch as the last troops of the Rotterdam kingdom left them in the dust, while the tribe could only eat dirt behind them. In fact, the Lordaeron army that retreated 2 days earlier could not make it back to Lordaeron. The terrain of the Tirisful forest itself limited the speed of retreat.
Not to mention, the 100,000 troops were squeezed on a forest road that only allowed 2 carriages to travel side by side. No matter how fast they marched, it would take them at least a week to reach Lordaeron. There were not many kings in this era who dared to use teleportation. King Tyrrhena's was almost going crazy. He had seen the orcs' godly skill of attacking cities with his own eyes. 2 orcs carrying a tree trunk dared to rush towards the gate of the city. If left alone, the gates would be opened in 2 to 3 minutes. Quick, quick, quick. My Kalia. My Arthas. Tyrrhena's heart broke when he thought of his wife and children who were still in Lordaeron. Unlike most other kings, Tyrrhena's had children at an old age. He only had Kalia when he was almost 40, and then Arthas. In this era where people married early and had children early, it was not wrong to say that he had children at an old age. He did not spoil his children very much, but he loved them as much as any father in the world. Tyrrhena's had already asked Mograine to abandon the army and lead the Lordaeron knights back. He was still afraid that they would not make it in time. In fact, the horde had already arrived a day before the vanguard of the Lordaeron army arrived. Your Highness! Your Highness! The orcs are attacking! Arthas, who was in the palace, was stunned. He raised his handsome but childish face and looked blankly at Melov, the captain of the royal guards, who had rushed into the palace in a hurry. What? It was not that the Rotterdam kingdom did not receive the news. In fact, when Alterac royal city fell 2 days ago, Duque had already sent a magical message. Duque repeatedly warned that the tribe would likely arrive within 3 days, but none of the people from the Rotterdam could come up with a solution. Many nobles believed that it was impossible for the tribe to reach the Broken Ridge within 3 days because it would take at least 7 days for the humans to travel by land. When King Tyrrhena's was not in Lordaeron, Arthas was in charge of the kingdom. Of course, the 13-year-old Arthas was already quite assertive, but because of his age, he was still more of a mascot. At this moment, he completely ignored the nobles who were waiting to be summoned and were now whispering in fear. He suddenly stood up and waved his hand, gesturing for Molev to come forward. The orcs have arrived? Yes, Your Highness, the god captain answered quickly. Melov was an experienced soldier. When he was young, Tyrrhena's had promoted him from a border guard to a guard. As time passed, he slowly rose to become the captain of the guards. Arthas knew him very well. Molev wasn't a coward. Right now, his face was pale and his body was trembling. They crossed the Alterac Mountains earlier than expected. In fact, by the time I reported to Your Highness, they should have already advanced to the shores of Lordaeron Lake. Arthas quickly walked past the guard captain and strode out of the inner palace. He practically jogged with the guards through the hall, climbed up the spiral staircase of the nearest tower, and walked to the nearest balcony. The melodious sound of a piano could be heard. The sound was so soft and pure that it seemed to make all the anxiety in one's heart disappear. It was the sound of Arthas's sister, Kalia. This was Kalia's piano room. When Arthas barged in wearing leather armor, the maids who were waiting by the piano, as well as Kalia herself, all raised their heads in shock. They stared blankly at Arthas, who was followed by Molev and the other guards, rushing in. Arthas, Princess Kalia asked tentatively. It's an emergency. Arthas waved his hand and quickly walked past them. Princess Kalia immediately realized the seriousness of the situation. She lifted her snow-white dress and trotted all the way to the balcony after Arthas. Then she was stunned. The 2 siblings felt as if they were struck by lightning. There was a buzzing sound in their ears, and they could not hear anything. All other irrelevant things in their field of vision were filtered out. They stood there motionless, like marble statues. From the high east balcony, they could see the most beautiful scenery in the whole of Lordaeron. Nearby was the blue, sparkling Lordrel Lake that was as wide as the sea. In the distance, there was the endless undulating Alterac Mountains like a barrier. At this moment, the scenery was still so breathtaking and majestic. However, on the empty grassland between the scenery and the white city walls of the Rotterdam Kingdom, there was a group of green people that were constantly squirming. This bright green torrent, which had nothing to do with nature, kept twisting and turning. It was like locusts eroding the entire grassland, spreading all the way to the shore of the lake. It was as if they wanted to fill everything in their field of vision with this green. This was not an illusion. Deputy Commander Duke Marcus' repeated warnings were not alarmist talk. This time, the horde had really come. With an unyielding murderous intent. With an endless amount of destruction.
Arthas heard the screams of the maids behind him.
However, other than the sound of his sister's breathing, he could not hear anything else.
Molev!
Arthas's roar woke the captain of the knights, who was staring at the scene in the distance with his mouth wide open.
Your Highness! Molev quickly lowered his head. Sound the alarm. Close the city gates immediately. Get all the soldiers to the top of the wall. Other than defending the city walls, there is no other way to defend against their first wave of attack. Arthas, who was very assertive, made his decision. But Your Highness, there are still thousands of refugees waiting for inspection outside the east gate. Arthas's cheek muscles twitched. Just force the door open. There are at least 3,000 refugees outside. Molev looked like he was about to cry. Arthas slapped him. Idiot! These 3,000 people are dead for sure. If we sacrifice 300,000 people in Lordaeron to save 3,000 people, we will be the sinners of Lordaeron. Go, now. The captain covered his face and quickly left. Chapter 429. Prince Arthas was right. This was the only way he could save the majority of his people. To be so resolute at such an inexperienced age was definitely a rare and valuable quality. Arthas was also wrong. This was the same as abandoning his own people, even if it was only a small part of them. In this era where sacrifice, courage and chivalry were emphasized, most kings who were brave enough would choose to send their generals or even personally lead the army to fight for a chance of survival for their citizens who had yet to enter the city. Princess Kalia covered her mouth and nose in shock, looking at Arthas in disbelief. It was as if she had just met Arthas for the first time, and not as a good brother and sister who had been in love with each other for 13 years. Sister! Father took away almost all the generals and mages. He didn't even leave any champion knights for me. Arthas complained angrily. Yes, no matter how brave a general was, he could not lead a group of pigs to victory. The pressure on the western front was too great. In the Silver Pine Forest, Grom Hellscream's ferocious attack was undoubtedly the best feint. King Terenas was forced to take away almost every professional soldier in Lordaeron, except for the royal guards. Other than a small number of archers, most of the soldiers defending the city were farmers who only knew how to use pitchforks a month ago. They could not even put on their armor. Sister, you stay here. After saying this, Arthas left Kalia in a daze and walked down the tower. Molev followed closely behind. Molev! Send a small team of royal guards to stand by. If the east gate is breached, immediately bring my sister to the west and find my father. Your Highness, what about you? As long as the men of the Menethil family are not dead, no one can take Lordaeron away from us. Arthas's voice was sonorous. Send my order. Have all the generals on standby lead their troops to the east gate. Arthas quickly put on a slightly larger set of exquisite armor. This was a gift from his father, King Terenas, when he was 12 years old. The precocious young Arthas looked mighty and majestic, but that was all. His body hadn't fully grown yet, so he couldn't pick up the warhammer he wanted to use the most. He could only grit his teeth and pick up a large double-edged broadsword. When he rode his horse to the east gate under the escort of the guards, he was shocked to find that the gate was still open. A large number of citizens from the surrounding towns and villages of Rotterdam City had yet to enter the city. Because they were reluctant to part with their life's wealth, they became even more flustered when they heard the rumbling footsteps behind them. They desperately tried to squeeze into the narrow city gate with their belongings. Arthas grabbed the guard's breastplate. I've given the order to close the gates immediately. Why didn't you close the door? Do you want to kill 300,000 citizens of Rotterdam? The guard at the gate argued loudly. But they are our neighbors and good friends. I know quite a few of them. Sister Mary, the traveling merchant Anon who always goes to the Silver Pine Forest. They're here. Molev exclaimed. Arthas followed the guard captain's finger and looked to the east. It was different from the view from the balcony of the tower. From this angle, he could first see a small forest a kilometer away, then the lake further away. At this moment, the fastest group of orcs had already rushed out of the small forest. The orcs were charging at a very fast speed. Although they were not as fast as the fastest horses, they were not much different from the full speed of a pack horse. Arthas grabbed the monocular from the hands of a general next to him, and he immediately saw a shocking scene. These green-skinned beasts had the same body size as the strongest humans. They had explosive muscles and huge beast-like heads.
However, he couldn't see any large siege weapons, except for some heavy logs that he thought were giant warhammers, and some crudely made but shockingly long ladders. What shocked Arthas the most was that the height of these ladders matched the height of the city walls of Rotterdam. Other than that, what entered his vision were giant hammers, axes, and extremely blunt swords that humans couldn't wield. He was also sure that they definitely had iron hooks and ropes. They were unimaginably barbaric, but they had extraordinary intelligence. Ah! The people under the city gate screamed even louder. They crazily squeezed into the city gate, pushing and shoving each other. The more panicked they were, the more they squeezed into the city gate. The drawbridge of the moat was filled with people and animals pulling carts. Arthas's eyes almost popped out of his head when he saw a carriage overturned on the drawbridge. A horrifying scene appeared in his and the other guards' minds. In less than 10 minutes, those brutal green-skinned beasts would step over the corpses of these idiots who wanted to squeeze into the city. They would rush into Rotterdam through the city gate that was wide open because of these guys, turning the entire city into a sea of fire and pushing 300,000 people into hell.
Shoot! Shoot at those mobs!
Arthas's fierce shout was like that of a devil.
But, those are our brothers and sisters. The guard at the city gate shouted. He looked like he was about to cry. The next moment, his voice stopped abruptly. He had never imagined that his head would be cut off by the most respected Prince Arthas with a single strike. At least 100 people witnessed this scene, and each of them was so shocked that their mouths were wide open, unable to close. Bastard! For the safety of 300,000 people. In the name of Arthas Menethil, I order you all to shoot. Otherwise, all of you will die with these mobs. The thunderous shout finally woke up the stunned archers. They gritted their teeth with tears in their eyes and started shooting. The citizens of Rotterdam who were rushing into the city cried even louder. They would never imagine the scene of their own country's soldiers shooting at them even in their nightmares. Almost instantly, there was not a single living creature on the entire drawbridge. The citizens near the moat beside the drawbridge screamed in fear and scrambled to escape from this land of death. Shoot anyone who dares to go near the drawbridge. Arthas shouted with tears in his eyes. Melov, take some people and push everything on the drawbridge into the moat. Then, raise the drawbridge as fast as possible. Melov did as he was told. They pulled every single citizen who was still in shock into the city and pushed most of the corpses and debris into the moat. However, an overturned carriage was firmly pinned down on the drawbridge. It was a carriage that carried food. The 2 horses were already dead. However, the dead horses' corpses and the food that was tied up too well were at least 2 tons heavy. It was not something that could be solved by manpower. In the past, such a situation would take a long time. Now, it was almost impossible to solve it in less than 10 minutes. Chapter 430. In the distance, Orgrim was overjoyed at the sight. Ancestors above! Attack that gate! The great chief's voice inspired every beastman around him. The beastmen who did not participate in the destruction of Alterac shouted loudly. The great chief had promised that they would have the chance to kill and destroy. Now, it was time for the great chief to fulfill his promise. The beastman warriors seemed to be on steroids. Their footsteps quickened as they charged forward. On the other side, Arthas was distraught. Some sharp-eyed archers saw to him that the orcs were carrying some crude, pre-made bridges to cross the moat. This kind of preparation was very different from what he knew of the beastmen. Furthermore, those huge wooden bridges were not something that humans could carry. But in his field of vision, there were only 2 beastmen carrying these wooden bridges. The most unimaginable thing was that these beastmen were actually wearing thick iron armor. What kind of terrifying power was this? From the tower, the beastmen looked like ants swarming across the empty space. They quickly rushed across the empty space and approached the city walls. Arthas was shocked by the sheer number of them. These brutal beasts killed more than 2,000 people who were still lingering outside the moat in front of the Lordaeron guards as if they were cutting melons and vegetables. No! Some people looked at the beastmen with hatred, while others secretly glanced at Prince Arthas. Arthas did not notice, because the beastmen had already filled his eyes. Now, from the nearest point of his field of vision to the far distance, to the grasslands and groves by the edge of Lordermere Lake, to the valley where the cliffs of the mountains split open,
he saw a dense crowd of orcs.
His dream of waiting for his father to lead the army back was shattered. The horde was already there. They filled the valley and surrounded the city. Now the whole city looked like a dead leaf on a tree in autumn, about to fall. In the magic transmission mirror, Arthas had seen how the beast men treated the fallen shattered ridge. He did not want that scene to happen again. The young prince worked hard. He had initially ordered the ballistae to shoot at the beast men, but the effect was terrible. If it was a human army that was lined up neatly, one shot from a ballista could kill at least 10 people. The orcs who were charging in a scattered manner were clearly the bane of ballistae, which dealt high single-target damage but did not have large AoE attacks. Most of the ballistae did not hit their targets, which made the already flustered defenders very frustrated. Soon, the orcs entered the range of the archers. Fire! The scene of the enemies falling to the ground one after another did not happen. These terrifying monsters were wearing armor that was thicker than that of humans. Just by hearing the clanking of arrows, Arthas estimated that the armor of these monsters was at least a third of an inch, 8 millimeters, thick. Arthas suddenly came to a realization. That's right. The military manual that was personally written by the Alliance's Vice Commander Duke Marcus, and distributed to all the Alliance's high-ranking generals, had a line that said that bows and arrows were useless against the strong orcs. Only heavy javelins could kill orcs better. Javelins! Where are our javelins? Arthas bellowed.
They've all been transferred away by His Majesty,
Molev said with a sad face.
In the midst of hesitation and panic, a large number of orcs had already rushed past the firing range of the long-range weapons. Thousands of orcs threw crude wooden bridges onto the moat, and some orcs who could not wait any longer even began to cross the river.
Arthas' heart sank. It was midsummer, and because of the temperature, the water level of the entire Lordamir Lake had dropped. The water level of the moat that connected to Lordamir Lake had also dropped. It was only about 2 meters deep. To most humans, this was a disaster. But for the huge and burly orcs, who were over 7 feet, 1 m, tall, it was a depth that they could easily cross. He did not know why the orcs were so confident that they could directly jump into the water, but it was obvious that the orcs had planned this beforehand, and they had succeeded. The orcs either rushed over the bridge or crossed the river with crude shields to protect their heads. The orcs began to use huge wooden ladders to climb the city wall. Because the wooden ladders were generally too heavy and had barbs, the defenders could not push them away at all.
The gate can't hold on any longer.
A scream made Arthas tremble. Only 4 orcs rushed over the suspension bridge, and they used huge logs as battering rams to violently attack the gate. The gorgeous white gate seemed to be on the verge of collapse. If the huge gate had not been well covered with iron sheets, the huge impact alone would have been enough to blow the gate open. From this angle, Arthas could not see the whole thing clearly, but he could hear the sound of wood cracking and metal twisting. Arthas knew that the gate would not be able to hold on for long. The Prince of Lordamir shook his head frantically, trying to put the shouts behind him. He was distraught.
More than one orc had climbed up the city wall not far from the archer tower he was standing on. He immediately realized that if he did not leave quickly, when the surrounding city walls were all occupied by orcs, he would be surrounded and killed in this archer tower. Molev obviously realized this as well. He waved his hand, and the royal guards rushed down the spiral ladder to open a path for Arthas. The result was not good. In just a short 10 seconds, Arthas had already heard the screams of at least 7 people before they died. "Your Highness, hurry up and leave."
Molev's voice came from below. Arthas quickly swung his legs. The metal leg armor made his steps a little heavy, but he maintained his balance well. The scene in front of him suddenly brightened. He came out of the narrow staircase door of the archer tower, and the terrible sound of fierce fighting suddenly rushed towards him. This sound was completely different from the sound of the archer tower, which was 2 or 3 stories higher than the city walls. Arthas was stunned for a moment. A second later, he immediately discovered that there was a burly green-skinned orc waving a warhammer at him. His mouth was wide open, revealing his sharp fangs. He waved his heavy warhammer. Arthas had no choice but to swing his sword to meet the orc's sledgehammer. Bang! After a muffled sound of metal and wood colliding, the prince was sent flying. He hit the battlements and saw stars. He painfully realized that he was not an adult warrior. Even though he had a burly body that far surpassed his peers and trained himself strictly, his muscles were still not perfect. His strength was still not at its peak.
"Your Highness!"
Molev rushed out like lightning, stabbing the orc who tried to attack Earthes with his spear. At this moment, every single person from Rotterdam heard the roar of the city gate collapsing. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.